All right, I'm going to call this meeting to order of the Sacramento City Unified School District Board of Education special board meeting on March 11th, 2021. Superintendent, could you please take roll?
Yes. Member Pritchett.
Here.
Member Morawski.
Here.
Member Wu.
Present.
Member Garcia.
Here.
Member Villa.
Present.
Member Rhodes.
Present.
And President Pritchett, Member Phillips did communicate that she was not available for this meeting.
Yes, I just spoke with her. Thank you. Okay.
And our student board member, Mr. Sheikh, is also joining us today.
Perfect. Nice to see you, student member Sheikh. Okay, so we'll go on to item 2.0, special presentation. Student member Sheikh, would you like to do the opening statement?
Sure, President, give me a second. We usually don't read those for special meetings. I didn't pull it up. Okay, I got it. This meeting of the Sacramento City School Board is being recorded in its entirety and will be cablecast on Metro Cable 14, the local government affairs channel, on Comcast Consolidated Communications and AT&T Uverse. Today's meeting will air Monday, March 15th at 8 p.m. and Thursday, March 18th at 7 p.m. and also webcast at www.sacmetrocable.tv. The public has been given the opportunity to address the board through public comment, either by submitting comments which are posted on our website or by speaking during the meeting. Members of the public were also provided the opportunity to speak to the board. Members of the public who wish to speak during the meeting submitted a speaker form by noon today and were sent a link to participate. When it is your turn to provide comment, we will call on you to provide comment orally. Your video will not be on. Please always limit comments during public comment to items that are not on the agenda. If you do comment on an item that is on the agenda, we will ask that you please defer your comments until your item comes up on the agenda. I think President Pritchett's screen is frozen.
It looks like it, yes.
Okay.
But yeah.
Well, I think we can.
Yes, Vice President Morawski, we do have one public comment. We do have one public comment for this item. Now, I don't know if legal counsel is there. I don't know if it's a public comment for the special board meeting or on the actual agenda item.
Sorry about that. I had a little mishap. Got kicked off the internet. Thank you, student member Sheikh. And just a reminder that as of the March 18th board meeting, live public comments will be allowed, but the written comments will only be sent to board members via email and posted on the district's website. Okay, item 2.0, recommendations from the Parent Advisory Committee and Student Advisory Council for the Local Control Accountability Plan, LCAP. Mr. Harris and Mr. Ramirez-Fong.
Actually, good evening, Board Member Pritchett, board members, and Superintendent Aguilar. My name is Vincent Harris, our Chief of Continuous Improvement and Accountability. Really, tonight's presentation is framed in kind of three parts. The first part actually will be led by Ms. Briggs from the California School Boards Association, who will provide a general framing of the board's role in the LCAP development process. Then we'll shift to a staff presentation, which will provide some general framing of the LCAP itself, but then actually will allow for an extended conversation between the board and our LCAP PAC and our Student Advisory Council. Staff will wrap up, depending on interests and those things that we think are relevant for you, with an overview of the draft goals, giving you a sense of not just the goals themselves, which we've now discussed in a couple of board meetings, but expected outcomes, a sense of the key actions associated with those goals, and additional considerations and stakeholder input. Really, the goal there is just to give you a sense of the draft, because everything right now is a work in process as we continue to debut them right now, and then of course go through our own feedback process tonight, and then of course with various stakeholder groups over the next several weeks. So that's our general frame for this evening. And so with that, I'll actually turn it over to Ms. Briggs to start the overall framing of the board's role in the LCAP development, and then we'll come back with the actual application of that development with staff work once the CSBA presentation ends. Ms. Briggs.
Thank you, Mr. Harris.
Well, good evening. My name is Mary Briggs. I'm the Director of Research and Education Policy Development at the California School Boards Association. I have a slide presentation that will kind of help lay the foundation for a framework for the way that you might think about the conversations that you're having tonight and ongoing conversations. This is based off of a brief that was developed by CSB. Actually, if you want to go back to that second slide, that would be great. So the framework was really developed in concert with two professional learning networks of board members and superintendents over a 2-year process. So fortunately, we had support from the California Collaborative for Educational Excellence to operate 2 years of professional learning networks around LCAP implementation. And for our members, this was a really important opportunity to kind of flesh out what the role of the board member is within the LCAP development and implementation and monitoring. In part, when LCFF rolled out, we knew that there was going to be an LCAP, and there was a very clear role defined in the statute that said, you know, they will vote on and approve the LCAP at a board meeting following a public hearing on a separate day. But there was not a lot of additional guidance within the statute. And so when PACE did some research studying the early days of implementation, they found that there was a wide range of ways that governance teams were getting involved in LCAP development. Some were getting advised that really they should only be involved at the very end of the process and in monitoring, whereas there were others that were actively engaged in supporting the stakeholder feedback. And so to try and come up with some consensus around the ways that board members can appropriately be involved in the development of the LCAP, they kind of hashed that out over the course of 2 years. Again, that was over 30 board members and superintendents. We had one network that was focused specifically on small school districts and one for medium and large districts, and they were representatives of districts throughout the state of California. And so if you want to go to the next slide, here's what they landed on. And we'll go through each of these individually. But one is kind of your individual responsibility and your group responsibility of really having a deep understanding of the LCAP, both the purpose and the process, so that you can engage in it effectively. You have a role in the development of LCAP goals and the supports that are necessary to achieve effective implementation. We'll talk about the kind of fine balance between that role and all of the stakeholder input and what that might entail. But the other piece is the governance team is there to support and encourage the outreach that is being made. Representative group of stakeholders possible, and particularly with an emphasis on families and students and other stakeholders who have historically not been engaged in the planning process, so that their needs are called also to the development of the LCAP. And so I know you have some presentations this evening. That's a piece of it. But your role as board members might be to work with the superintendent and work with maybe district staff to encourage and kind of check in on what are the ways that they are doing the outreach process and really reaching out for the diverse range of stakeholders, particularly in historically marginalized student groups and families. Building an understanding of the data so that you can have informed discussions, and also serving as key communicators once the LCAP is adopted. So you are going to be able to reach out and share with the community, here's what we came up with. This is our LCAP. and how to communicate that clearly, how to advocate for the choices that were made, how to celebrate the contributions of stakeholders, and the ways that they contributed to that process is also important. And then again, a more traditional role of the board is that monitoring and evaluation of the LCAP implementation process. So those are the kind of the 6 roles that we're talking about tonight. And let's dig into the first one if you want to go to the next slide. Could someone go to the next slide, please? Great. So in order to engage with the LCAP effectively, you really do need to understand it, and kind of at the philosophical level, the kind of context of this. And we have to remember that not all board members were serving on boards when the LCFF was passed, when LCAP templates first rolled out. And there are new board members sometimes who come with no prior experience in relation to the LCAP. So one piece of this is making sure that everybody really has a firm understanding of that. The intent of LCFF, right, to offer local flexibility in meeting the needs of your community, but being accountable to that community in very specific ways. And to really focus on equity. You know, the design of LCFF and LCAP templates are really looking at the strategies and resource allocation according to student need, and especially called out with those prioritized in LCFF, as well as other groups that are reported on the dashboard. Another piece that I'm going to hammer home a couple of times tonight, and I can see that there is some work that you have done in this area, having only kind of taken a preview of your work, but really trying to make sure that the LCAP is not a compliance-only document that you fill out for the state and put on the shelf until the spring, and then kind of come back and revisit it. You know, it really is something that should be aligned with other initiatives and plans. So I know you have a strategic plan as part of your work. You have, I saw in one of the slides later on tonight, you have something, you know, the equity, access, and social justice guiding principles. Those things should be documents that speak to one another. They should be integrated in a way where there's coherence, because we know that our system can often be additive. People throw in new things, and it really dilutes people's efforts. So there is really an understanding that this should be something that serves your needs, and advancing some of those other efforts that are going. And again, I'll state, anytime you have a new board member coming on, to have some sort of onboarding process for them to kind of get introduced to the process, to sit down and look at what that existing LCAP is, and why choices were made, you know, what informs that, and how you're measuring that, so that they can participate fully within those conversations as well. So if we go to the next slide, there is an important role in helping develop the goals and supports. Now, you as board members, the board members present this evening, historically, you know that one of your roles has been to set the mission, the vision for the district, set the policies, and in most cases, that's goal setting, right? But you have a process now with LCAP templates where you're in a structure where you're getting a lot of your goals through the stakeholder feedback, and you are working with the central office to kind of help refine those goals. You have a role in this process. In the end, you have to make sure that the LCAP goals are aligned with the board priorities, but really kind of emphasize that some of the best things that our members really found in just making sure that the focus is on improving equitable opportunities as well as outcomes, being really specific about the strategies that you're using, and setting clear timelines and metrics for implementation and monitoring. To go back to something I've mentioned earlier, it's not kind of a one and done event. So there are places along the way that you might want to have some midpoint checks to just see if there's any course correction that needs to be made. It's also important that the entire governance team is operating with shared definitions of terms and expectations. So having those conversations to really make sure that you're speaking about things in the same way and you have that shared understanding. And another thing is your role is to support successful staff implementation with the guidance and policies that you're sending forth and any resource allocation that is appropriate. Your role is one of support in this place as well. And if we go to the next slide, this is really one of the core pieces of the process of developing the LCAP, and I'm really excited to see that you'll be having some presentations this evening that summarize some of the findings and recommendations from different stakeholder groups. This is one where, when the LCAP was designed, it was really intentional, laying out the intent of getting more diverse representation in providing stakeholder engagement. And so your role as board members is to ensure that you're able to support the superintendent and district staff in running a successful engagement program. So kind of finding out, like, what are the different ways that we are reaching out? We are highlighted this year with additional challenges, but in other years, we've already had issues making sure that we have underrepresented voices feel welcome in those conversations and have an opportunity to engage, perhaps in different ways than we've traditionally run them within schools. So alternative times, alternative locations, the whole range of opportunities. And there are a lot of great people out there doing work around effective community engagement. There are advocacy groups, but there is also the California Collaborative for Excellence in Education actually has a community engagement initiative that they have been working with. I believe it's Families First and San Bernardino County Office of Education and CABE, the California Association of Bilingual Education. They've been working to support school districts in developing effective stakeholder engagement. I was just scrolling through their website the other day and saw they do have several things about stakeholder engagement during distance learning and like during COVID. And so they have some resources on there, but it requires a lot of creativity, and your role is kind of supporting that creativity and making sure those opportunities are in place so that we are getting the voices of all of our community, and really kind of hoping to get additional samples of feedback from those who are historically marginalized in our schools and society. The other thing is, and this comes back to communication as well, but I think it's really crucial. This is both something that is required, but also just the right thing to do. And that is demonstrating how stakeholder input was used in developing the final LCAP plan. So in the template, you are required to call that out, but it shouldn't just be a compliance effort. It's really important to stakeholders that take the time to give you feedback and bring their wisdom and experience to the table, to know that they have been heard and to see that maybe they don't get everything that they want. It's really hard to get everything in there, and we have to be mindful of how many things we put in an LCAP. And we may just find that we can't get everything in there, but number one, knowing that they are heard, and number two, seeing where their impact took place and how it really shaped it. Because if they don't see that, they show up, they take time away from their family, or, you know, if a student taking time away from when they're doing their homework or other activities or their jobs, if they don't feel like it made any difference, they won't come back the next year. And I think that if people feel like their contributions have been heard and that they can see when those have been incorporated, those should be celebrated, because they need to know that input was valued. And so part of your role as the board is making sure that, you know, both in the LCAP template where it's required, but also in some of your communications, that you are celebrating some of the places where stakeholder engagement really inspired some new work or existing work or strengthened it. So if we go on to the next one. Before, actually, you can keep the slide there, but I was also going to say, I did kind of preview some of the slides that you'll be looking at later tonight, and I want to celebrate, I saw in the student advisory committee's recommendations, they have several recommendations within their presentation about ways to get better representation and stakeholder feedback. So, you know, sometimes it's really important to hear from that group to know where they think the opportunities are for getting additional opportunities for stakeholder feedback. So I was really pleased to see that. The next piece is a more traditional sounding board member role, you know, but you're going to be using data in the LCAPs, both in identifying the data that you'll use in metrics. That will be done kind of at the staff level, but you want to make sure that you are creating the conditions for effective data discussions. That might be professional learning about the uses and limitations of data. Those are conversations that I'm not sure we get to have, you know, at the dais very often, but knowing the uses and limitations of the data that we have, you might be able to get that in board workshops, etc. I think your staff can be really helpful in providing some insights into that. You can spread some data discussions throughout the year related to the LCAP to monitor the implementation. So it doesn't have to be done, you know, kind of at the end of the year. I'm not sure what your practices are. You may already be doing this. So if you are, pat on the back. Really kind of taking the time to determine which data are required for them, and having some protocols in place for requesting disaggregated data from staff in relation to the LCAP. Kind of having a protocol for, you know, when it is appropriate, how you do that outreach. You know, I want to make sure that there's some agreement on the governance team about how that takes place within the district. And then there's an additional role, again, in thinking about the communication at the local level, and that's making sure that the data is meaningful and accessible to stakeholders. Oftentimes, districts, when they're doing stakeholder engagement, will have opportunities to look at data walks. I'm not sure if you're able to do a virtual data walk these days. I'm not sure how that would work, but you know, stakeholders are going to be contributing their recommendations, and data can be really important to guide those conversations. So having that in a way that is meaningful and accessible when you have your stakeholder outreach is really important. If we go to the next slide. Yeah, I think you know, your role as board members really is to also send the message of what's going on in the district. And the LCAP can end up being a really unwieldy document with a lot of fine-grained details. So many districts, as I'm sure you know, and maybe your district is one of them, will often develop kind of a one-pager with like key themes. I've seen placemats, larger things, posters, whatever they might be, but it's kind of a way that you've distilled everything down into a streamlined message. Be really clear and concise about the messages and themes for the goals, the strategies, and again, also highlighting resource allocation, right? How are you supporting the successful initiatives through giving them the resources they need to do it? So streamlined messages, making sure that there's a lot of outreach and communication to stakeholders. So liaisons, translation, presentations to school sites and different stakeholder groups. You can get really creative with that. And in a range of formats. So right now, there might be a lot of digital formats that you would be considering. But we've seen campaigns where parents get little videos explaining one of the LCAP goals, and they see students at work or things like that, where it kind of makes the big document come to life for people and that they can see it at work. And if you want to go to the next slide. More traditional role for a board member, right? Monitoring and evaluating progress. So again, we have to go back to making sure that you have a really firm grip on what the LCAP goals are, what the strategies are, and the metrics. Those should be things that you're thinking about. If they were important enough to put in the LCAP, they should be things that you're thinking about throughout the year. And so I think, understanding those is really important to have an idea of. That's part of the lens that you'll bring when you're having conversations about programs that the district is running. And so that's one piece. Having ongoing discussions about implementation and outcomes, you could consider checkpoints throughout the year to allow for mid-course correction. If there's something that's coming up, maybe a new program where you might want to make some tweaks, that might be a place to have a conversation about it rather early on, rather than at the end of the year. I think that there are a couple of important factors as well when you think about promoting a long-term view and working towards coherence and sustainability. And one of those things that I would just kind of throw in there as a highlight for me is, again, reviewing the LCAP goals in relation to everything else you're doing in the district. Because we have a very additive approach in education. People have great ideas. They want to try them out. Sometimes we have to make sure, this great idea that someone has brought to the table, does it align with our LCAP? Where does it align? How might it align? But also, I don't know how many of you have heard this phrase, but review the LCAP goals, thinking about those other plans and thinking about where do we want to adopt new goals? Where do we want to amend goals? And where do we want to abandon goals? So adopt, amend, abandon, like thinking about making sure that you're providing the conditions for successful implementation by not having so many goals or initiatives that aren't aligned, so they create more work, so that people can't be successful in implementing them because their attention is divided in so many ways. So I think those are kind of the big pieces. I don't know if I have a slide after that. I don't think so. Oh, yes. So as I was was thinking about our conversation today, this was a brief that was developed in 2019. And there are a couple of things I wanted to point out if you haven't had a chance to read them. All of those ideas get discussed within there, but we have also provided in the brief a list of different resources for districts, and with the board member in mind. Also some sample policies that you can look at that are related to the issues of LCAPs and LCAP implementation. And then there's even an appendix with a little checklist for each of these roles. So those might be things that if you have time to kind of look at and think through what you already have at work. I know that there are many things that you were seeing on this slide today going, yep, we do that. You know, there are definitely things that you can say, I've been doing this practice for a while. We find it very successful. But there might be things that you'd like to look at adding as part of your practices as well. So hopefully this would be helpful for you. But after I was starting to put the slides together, I was rethinking the 2019 piece. And I was thinking about how important this is going to be as we look forward to the plans that we develop. The next few years are going to require a lot of attention to so many issues that have been exacerbated by the pandemic. I would advise you to consider thinking about, are there ways that you can be strategic in aligning spending of COVID relief funding with LCAP goals and strategies? That's not an LCAP requirement. But again, when we're trying to make sure that you have a coherent system in place, thinking about how they might overlap and actually strengthen your LCAP and strengthen the programs that you are there. And I know you know this, but I just feel like I always have to make sure I call it out really explicitly. You know, not all stakeholders have been impacted in the same way during this pandemic. And so you have a lot of good data to draw from earlier conversations, but trying to get at the differences in impacts and thinking about how you will address them in whatever form kids are back on campus, that's a really important piece. And again, we saw how access and opportunity was really hindered through the distance learning process in certain places. And so extra efforts to make sure that the voices of those students and families and other stakeholders have been impacted, that you're able to hear them. You know, these might not be the same answers that you got 6 months ago, because a lot has been going on for families and for students. And so making those extra efforts to think about it. I also kind of want to highlight something that has jumped out for me as a little red flag in thinking about how we plan things. You know, with the passage of AB 86, you have until June 1st to develop your plan for how you're going to address learning recovery through 2022 by June 1st. So, you know, there's a lot on your plate. And again, trying to see if there are ways that you can factor in some of the overlapping plans, overlapping or separate funding streams, thinking about what the implications might be in terms of the timeline for the final development of your LCAP. So just wanted to highlight that for you, because I kind of feel like when we had 1 month to develop LCAPs in the beginning of the year, you got the template at the beginning of the month and had to have it developed by the end. So just want to make sure that, you know, factoring in some of the AB 86 requirements and what that will have in terms of implications for your LCAPs. And I really think, again, that stakeholder engagement is you set the policy, you set the vision and the goals, but you are here in service of the community. And so hearing your stakeholder input, I think, can give you confidence in the decisions that you make ultimately. It's really an important opportunity for you as board members to hear the needs. I mean, the whole purpose of LCFF was local leaders know more about what's happening on the ground. And the more you make that stakeholder engagement piece equitable and really intentional, meaningful, the better information you'll have to develop that plan. And again, just kind of revisit progress that you've made on recent LCAP goals and strategies. I think that's part of your process. But, thinking again about adopt, amend, or abandon, is a kind of a useful phrase in my mind. But I hope that these pieces kind of provide a framework for what the board's role is beyond rubber stamping an LCAP at the end of the process. Because honestly, I've learned in working with boards and school districts, and I did a lot of research with Michael Fullen and some work that he was doing in districts. When the board was fully engaged and informed all along the way, they were able to make decisions that made initiatives more sustainable, more successful. When you have the board fully engaged, you just have a much better chance of having the changes and initiatives develop stability and move forward. So I appreciate your time. I'm very excited for the conversations you're going to have tonight, because just peeking at them, I think you have some really great stakeholder input. Does anyone have any questions?
Yeah, thank you, Mary, and we appreciate that info. I think this is a great, how, when, and why about the LCAP. I'd like to just make sure that we grab you for any board member questions before we lose you for the evening. Do we have any board members that have any questions for Mary? Lisa, or Member Morosky, sorry.
All right. I just mostly wanted to say thank you, Mary, for the presentation. I think the brief was really helpful for me to think about kind of what we're doing with LCAP and maybe some areas where we can improve. And just wanted to share a couple of things that stood out for me. And that is outreach to underrepresented groups, LCFF priority groups, having monitoring data throughout the year. I feel like we do monitor data, but maybe it's not as aligned with the LCAP goals. And I think we can probably be more intentional about that alignment and communicate that and tie it all back together. And I guess I wonder if there are any successful practices you've seen about how to outreach to underrepresented groups, because the same issues happen when you try to survey or hold a webinar or other ways we try to outreach. So would you use like focus groups, or are there any other ways to?
It's not going to be the most satisfying answer, but I think it's probably the most accurate, and that is, it depends. It really depends on the group, that you're trying to bring into the fold, and, what are the barriers for participation for those different groups. And so it's actually kind of a lot of work on the back end, trying to figure out who hasn't been a part of these conversations thus far or haven't been in adequate numbers, and thinking about, okay, what is going on on our end? What are the barriers for bringing these groups into the LCAP stakeholder input? I've seen a range of practices. I think that, again, like the Family Engagement Network has some really good resources, particularly timely. I think one was focused on English learners and their families.
Mm-hmm.
They might have some in regards to other groups. But I think it really is kind of backwards mapping. Okay, identify who isn't participating and that you want to make sure gets represented. And then thinking, okay, going to sources. So getting information about what those barriers might be. If you have liaisons with, different communities, that might be a good spot to say, okay, for us, it's a scheduling issue. For us, it might be, the format in which the meeting is taking place or location, so there are a lot of different pieces. I don't know, does Sac City have like family liaisons, like our family engagement office? Okay, yeah. Mm-hmm. So I think they might be able to provide some rich insights into, the different families that they're working with and what barriers might be, so that your role in essence becomes trying to figure out the best way to respond to them. But they're going to be different than from group to group and from school site to school site. I see a comment that said someone asking school site leaders is also, I think, an important piece. I think you're going to see some pieces tonight in the presentation that offer some really concrete recommendations for increasing opportunities for engagement, at least from the student presentation. So I think listening to the students, if they're saying, here's how we can get more students involved, that's important. So I think that's the answer.
Thank you very much. Again, we really enjoyed the brief, and it's like I was hanging on every word. And I think one more thing I guess I would just throw out to my colleagues is I would be excited to move forward with something that was more graphical, or a way to easily communicate the LCAP to our school communities. I think we can get creative about what that looks like, or how, what different formats that takes. But I think that that will help us, with that sustainability and coherence, and everyone understanding, where we're trying to go as a district and as a governance team. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Member Morosky. Do we have any other? Member Garcia.
Yes, thank you, Mary. Thank you for presenting this to the board. I feel very lucky that we're learning from the two PLN groups. So that it's a wealth of information, right? This is information I think that is after going through a very robust process. So we're sort of benefiting from that work that's come out over the last couple of years. So I really appreciate just the clarity of the presentation, and just what our role is, what our responsibility is, without really sort of being like a micro manager type of thing, right? So it's just really, it's just very clear in terms of finding that balance. I also really appreciated you highlighting the opportunities with AB 86 dollars, as well as federal dollars, right? Districts are poised to receive a lot of funds. And so we need to be very strategic on how, where those funds, how those funds are invested. And then the opportunity that we have in leveraging the LCAP presentation that we're going to hear about with the Learning Recovery Plan, right? Where we have to tell the state how we're going to spend those AB 86 dollars to mitigate learning loss. I did have a couple of questions in terms of maybe finding out what the best practice is in scheduling updates to the board. I understand like the connection to the LCAP at all times, but when what times of the year is it the best time for boards to hear about updates or the monitoring, right? I'm thinking of when the dashboard information comes out. It takes a little bit of time to process that information at the district level, but then just so that we can start thinking about when do we start scheduling those for the board, and really planning that out along some critical times around the year so that we can make the most out of it.
I think it's a good conversation for the whole governance team to have. I really think that you can work with Superintendent Aguilar to kind of think about what's fitting in kind of timelines throughout the year. So as you mentioned, like the dashboard presents some really interesting opportunities because when you report out on the dashboard, now that we didn't have a 2020 dashboard, the implications of COVID make this tricky. But if you think about this for future conversations, dashboard presents an opportunity because when you are identifying the different student groups that may need additional supports, and the school needs additional support in providing their education, that's a good time to be looking at what do we have in the LCAP that addresses this? Is this helping? Are we seeing progress? On our dashboard, we've had something related to this issue on our LCAP for the last 2 years, but we haven't made any movement. Those are good conversations to have after the dashboard is released. But I have the feeling that your governance team can kind of look at the calendar, the cycles of things throughout the year, and maybe what might be most appropriate. But I'd hesitate to give kind of a template for every district to follow.
Yeah, just trying to think of like those critical times throughout the year of when it makes sense to have a more in-depth conversation. Because sometimes we hear a lot of updates, and sometimes I just find it hard to connect it back to like the LCAP. So maybe it's the way we're structuring how we're hearing things or how things are being presented. But maybe it's a more proactive, well, this is how it directly relates. And there are references in our agenda items, but sometimes I just still find I struggle with the connections. But we have a great sort of blueprint here in terms of on how to improve that. Because this is work that you can always improve on your LCAP, on your goals, on your strategies, on your metrics. So this is not a statement to say that the effort hasn't been there. It's just to recognize that the LCAP is a living document. Every year you have to reflect on it. Every year you have to discuss it and learn from it, and then make all the changes that you just recommended, right? What do you adopt? What do you modify? And what do you abandon? So it's in that spirit that I think it would be beneficial for the board to have more frequent conversations. And I would also think that something like this, I think, would be great. That where the LCAP conversations kind of don't get squeezed out by other topics that we're discussing. So something to maybe take a note of until we find that right cadence, I think, with the ongoing monitoring and evaluation.
You are living the California continuous improvement model.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you, Board Member Garcia. Are there any other board member comments or questions for Mary before we move on? Okay, we'll move on. Superintendent, thank you again.
Everyone.
We appreciate your time.
I may stick on and watch a little bit.
We just didn't want to keep you just in case.
Thank you very much, Ms. Briggs. I'd like to turn it back over to Mr. Harris, President Pritchett, and board members, and also welcome all of our LCAP PAC members to this evening's special board meeting. I know that they've put in countless hours and have been looking forward to a conversation of this sort. And I know that the board is also very excited to interact with our LCAP PAC members. I'm sure it will be the first of many discussions between the board and LCAP PAC members. I do feel very fortunate that in our board today we have former LCAP PAC members, and so certainly the acknowledgement of the amount of work that goes into this process, I know is one that is deeply appreciated by some of our sitting board members. So with that, again, I just want to thank everyone for being part of tonight's meeting, and I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Harris.
If we could go ahead and put up the second PowerPoint for this evening, that would be great. Again, Vincent Harris, Chief of Continuous Improvement and Accountability, as Superintendent Aguilar spoke to. We have our members of our Parent Advisory Committee with us and our Student Advisory Council as well. And then, of course, Mr. Stephen Ramirez-Fong, our LCAP SIPSA coordinator. What I'll speak to tonight, though, is that the structure tonight is a little different than what you've seen for the past two board meetings because the LCAP, PAC, and the SAC have had an opportunity to formally present their thoughts on recommendations. We're actually going to reframe the opportunity this evening for the engagement to not be a presentation to you in terms of their comments, but actually give them an open forum to kind of emphasize areas that they've already previously shared with you. After that time is done, then Mr. Ramirez-Fong will actually take you through some of the drafting that we've done. It's important to know that the big word here is drafting, because obviously we know that we still have a lot of stakeholder engagement to accomplish. And so those drafts will, of course, evolve. They'll give you a sense, again, of the goals as we've currently got them defined, key actions that we've preliminarily have discussed with staff, expected outcomes, back to kind of the measurability, back to this notion of monitoring, what we see as some of the key outcomes, and then the stakeholder input that we have thus far. So again, tonight is meant to be very formative and very much to seek your feedback and dialogue with the LCAP, PAC, and SAC. Go to the next slide. So again, as we think about, and certainly this dovetails right back to the CSBA presentation, really a lot of our work does anchor around our core value and, of course, the guiding principle. I mean, ultimately, all of our work is linked to this notion of vigilantly working to confront and interrupt inequities and ultimately create the opportunities for everyone to learn, grow, and reach their greatness. And then the fulfillment of the guiding principle in terms of the next slide, ensuring all students have an equal opportunity to graduate with the greatest number of post-secondary choices from the widest array of options, really is the work of what a fully functional LCAP can do for our students, because of course it grounds itself in those things, in those strategies that increase and accelerate student achievement and sustain it. We'll go to the next slide. So as we think about what's in the LCAP, and I know many of you have seen this in many settings, I won't, of course, obviously read the whole slide to you. We've actually talked about all those components just in the prior presentation, but we'll make an emphasis on, I'll say, bullet number 3, because that really speaks to the intersections that we work on as a district. So as much as the LCAP is a multi-year and to some degree a strategic plan, one key operating difference between an LCAP and a strategic plan is that, of course, in strategic plans, you make a lot of assumptions on the financial pieces, right? You make COLA assumptions, you make growth assumptions, you make assumptions about things in order to create some financial concreteness. In the context of the LCAP, actually, you have to very specifically state what are the expenditures. And so it very much ties directly to the district's adopted budget. And so in many respects, the LCAP becomes a direct operational perspective of the district's budget. And so just want to make that point of emphasis as we talk about what we're looking to propose. It really is very concrete because everything will have to have a very specific dollar value assigned to it and will be reflected in the budget that we adopt come later this spring. Go to the next slide. And with that, I'll actually turn it over to our distinguished guests, both again from the LCAP PAC and our Student Advisory Council, to really provide not just opening, but really framing comments. And then after that, Mr. Ramirez-Fong will take you through kind of our drafting, if you will, of some of the things we've got in place for the LCAP this spring. Again, all those things subject to tonight's conversation and then our ongoing feedback from other stakeholder groups, which we'll be meeting with over the next several weeks. And so I'll turn it over to the LCAP PAC and Student Advisory Council to continue the dialogue.
I don't this is Miguel Cordova. I don't know how we want to proceed. Can we probably take the shared screen down? Because I was trying to get a sense from the group of who was going to speak a little bit. But I do want to begin with, there's been a couple of things. I mean, I love the presentation at the beginning to give you, to get a sense of what is the direction for the board in looking at this. And I do want to bring us back to a couple of things. I mean, one of the things that Vincent just talked about is that our core values, right? If you look at the beginning, it says inequitable by design. Our system is inequitable by design. So the LPAC didn't start by, let's just throw them in there and let's get some more, folks to kind of be a part of trying to figure out the system. It's with the sense that something just wasn't right. And so when we start thinking about the LPAC coming in, one of the things that was very important, and tonight I really want to make sure that this is how we're starting. I know there's some new board members that you're informed all along the way, right? And so you're beginning today by being informed all along the way about where we are. And the reality is that when you, and Sac City is not the only district, right? And it's just, I think, maybe we don't sugarcoat things as the LCAP, right? And I feel that way. I'm not going to sugarcoat something, especially when we're talking about inequities and we're talking about education and we're talking about kids. And I think one of the things that I think about, like the situation we're in now, is that, it was said that things have been exacerbated because of COVID-19. I actually don't think they're exacerbated in our district. They're just exposed. We've exposed what we've already knew along the way. Kids are going through a system that sooner or later in our education system here at Sac City, they would be where they are right now. We just moved them maybe a little bit faster because of COVID, and we've got to look at that. But the system is broken. And I just say that because when we look at the data over and over, third year for LCAP for me, right? And we look at the same data every year, and nothing changes. So when I hear the word monitoring, I have some concerns, because monitoring to me says it's just kind of looking like, oh, yep, we stay the same, right? Somebody has to be responsible for moving it. Somebody has to be the micromanager. Maybe it's not the board, but somebody does. And so I'm looking at the superintendent and his administration as saying, as potentially, like, they have to have the role of being that micromanager, really who's moving the needles, because the needles aren't moving. And I'll just say from the very beginning, when we went into COVID and there was a plan to introduce how we're going to move through distance learning this year, one of the things I knew from the outset, and it was a great plan, and I thought it was an awesome, incredible presentation, but I knew it wasn't going to work because it relied on assessments. And we know historically, when we look at the data year after year after year, assessments is not something we do here at Sac City. For whatever reasons, they don't happen. They do not happen. So because of that, you are already going to be running behind. You're already going to have to be kind of figuring out, troubleshooting how we get back on track, because assessments don't happen, and it's worse as you go up the grades. So I just, I wanted to start that way, because it's like, you've got to know what you have, and what you have right now is a system that's broken. There's got to be a way to come together between labor and the administration and the board. Obviously, that and everyone's got to be on board. But I'm just telling you right now, so much of what we look at, it's like, how do we recommend? What do we recommend? Knowing that it's broken, knowing that day one, when we have the first assessments, they're not going to happen. So if they happen at mid-year or somewhere along the way or at the end, you never had them at the beginning. You never knew where the kids started. This is what the plan that we're kind of setting up. I'm sorry, I didn't know I didn't have video. But so for me, when I look at these things and we talk about LCAP, it really is, where do you begin? And I don't want to take up too much time here, but it's really like two systems. I mean, you're lucky. We're all lucky. We have someone like Isa who comes on here and shows us someone that's amazing, incredible student, right, at the high school level. And I wish we could have hundreds of ISAs, thousands of ISAs in our system, right? But we know that there's so many struggles along the way to get there, and we know that they're not all getting. We said it from the very beginning, right? We said that it's an inequitable system, and we know that. We're saying that from the beginning. And so to me, like, when we look at these things, it's like we are kids that we're trying to help because we know that we haven't done enough. And as they're getting older, we're trying to do as much as we can so that we can get them through A through G, or give them enough so that they can move on and give them some sense. But when we go back to the beginning of where kids are starting kindergarten, first grade, and they're still beginning at the same place that we're trying to fix and address all these needs that students have at the higher grades, then we're not changing anything. Something has to change. We have to have a place that we're saying, we've got to start at least when we're this year's kindergarten kids, we know that we're going to implement a system that we worked out, that we're going to try in full fidelity, that we believe that this is the plan that's going to get us there. And for these other kids, we got to do as much as we can to restore some of that, because we know that we've created all these holes for them along the way. So I get the whole thing about monitoring, and I get the whole thing as a board that you're elected and following that, but somebody has to move the needle, and you have to allow for that room. And I really feel that that's an important message that we have to send today. It's like, I get it, but the definition of insanity is looking at the same thing over and over. And I feel like we've gone through that. At least I've gone through that for 3 years now. I'm looking at the same data, knowing that night, and when we come in whatever month that we look at testing or looking at the climate surveys and all that the results are going to be little to none. And looking at assessments again, hoping that we move the needle a little bit, it's just not enough in a system that's failing so many kids. And so, a lot of these recommendations are really hard to come to because we know that we're leaving some on the floor. We're cutting some out that kids need. But because of funding and because of trying to come up with a number of recommendations, you have to cut out so many things. Not that they're excessive. Kids need these recommendations that we're leaving on the table, that we're cutting out and leaving on the floor. And that's what's so hard about this job. And so I feel like the LCAP was brought up, not just, and I get the whole thing about including, folks who are going to to give you some of that, but you've got to realize too that people have gone through the system. We have generational failure, right? Especially here in Sac City, we have it. Parents, grandparents who have gone through the system that's failed them, and they just expect the same thing, and we've got that, and they're tired. They're tired of asking. They're tired of saying something needs to change. They're tired of going to the same schools and still not feeling that connection, not feeling welcome and all that. When we talk about how do we talk with parents, reach out, just on a normal way, connect with parents, and they'll trust you. They'll see you. They'll start coming to you. They'll want to hear from you. But if that doesn't happen even at the beginning, like in our schools where we don't have people reaching out, there's not going to be a connection for them to be engaged in even the smallest way. And so, I did want to just kind of start out because as I was hearing things, I felt there was a lot of that about how just realizing, especially as folks are coming in, that where we truly are at Sac City, and it is not just about like recommendations and putting them in place and budgeting, but actual change. It's actual change because we already know this system isn't working, and we've got to do something to change it. And so we come to you with with recommendations that honestly have been kind of maybe hard fought, but knowing that we've left so much still that students need on the floor, and we're just trying to figure out where we go. But honestly, I feel, and there's people who will be on the committee and speak that have been here longer, but 3 years of seeing the same thing, it just doesn't work. It doesn't work. So I kind of said my piece, so I'm just gonna open it up here for others to chime in.
Do we have any other LCAP members that would like to chime in? Ms. Rodriguez?
Yeah, I just wanted to just thank Mary for her presentation, and just a couple of points. I'm really glad that, thank you for this time, and I hope that you guys will ask questions, not just of the four of us who have been able to present to you now for the third time, but ask questions so that other members of the LCAP PAC can answer your questions and engage with you also.
Thank you. Ms. Webster Hawkins?
Thank you. Yes. Last week when we met and it was late in the evening, I cut my comments short because I was hopeful for this conversation today. And it's a little bit coincidental that part of the comments, my comments to you that I cut out was actually a quote from the governance brief that Ms. Briggs outlined for you tonight. And she did a great job describing the meat of the recommendations, the pillars of your responsibility. But the quote that I wanted to share with you is in the preamble and the call to action to you as a board of trustees. The quote says, "The inequities in today's education system reach back to the beginning of the United States public school system, and there is a distinct connection between this history and our current reality. And it is critical that we recognize that educational inequity is a symptom of societal inequities, racism, classism, sexism, and many other isms that have an impact on our students and families. But nonetheless, it's your responsibility." It goes on to call upon your responsibility as trustees to eliminate educational inequity through all the tools at your disposal, including academic and discipline policy decisions and investment in highly qualified and experienced teachers and 21st century technology, all with decisions based on data and designed to direct more resources to the underserved students. I think what resonates for me, she called upon you to seize this opportunity. This is an incredible opportunity. It's not just a triple storm, but it may be a triple opportunity coming out of the pandemic. You have the new triennial LCAP plan, which will shape our academic and support program for our students and families. And you also have the funding that's being generously given to schools to help right the ship. EdSource just published tonight a piece that reports that Sac City Unified School District is going to receive in total $269 million from all federal and state sources, including the federal package and the CARES relief. $269 million. What we are calling upon you to do, what the PAC is calling upon you to do, is to not just use that money to fill holes, to buy the shiny baubles, to quickly purchase a bunch of Band-Aids to make everybody feel better, but rather to start building the car, rebuilding the car, redesigning the car from the chassis up, questioning the expenditure and the insertion of every nut and bolt in that chassis. Is it a strong bolt? Does it work? Does it make the axle spin better? Are there better tires we could use? And worrying about the chassis, the engine, and the safety measures in that car for all people, regardless of where they're sitting in the car. We don't want just the shotgun and driver to have the airbags. We want everybody to have the airbags, right? And you do all that before you think about where all the drink holders are. The point is that LCAP needs to be based on what's effective, not what's nostalgic. We have a lot in our current LCAP. If it's 170 pages. You flip through the expenditures, there's a lot of stuff in there that just simply are a reflection of the
Ms. Webster Hawkins, if you can hear us, it seems that you may have lost internet connection or it's lagging, which mine does often. I can relate. Oh, we lost her. Oh, maybe not. Would any of the other LCAP members like to weigh in while we're waiting for her to come back?
Yeah, hi. This is Kathy Horiuchi. I have 3 children in Sac City Unified, and to be a broken record, let me start by saying I have 2 seniors, and there is no way to remedy the learning lost from the last 12 months. They've already applied for colleges. They'll get some acceptances, I hope. They might not, but you cannot remedy that. There is absolutely no remedy. There's no remedy for a lot of it. And so as we look at what we're doing with that money, you have to look at all the students we have, all the kindergartners who didn't come in. Why didn't they come in? What are we going to give them instead? And as I look at my seniors, I think about when they came into Sac City Unified as first graders. They were foster children at that time, all three of them. And so they were marked down as foster youth that year and the next year. And the third year, they were adopted and they simply became students. And since that time, there have been many struggles they've had, and especially my seniors this year. And I know that LCFF money was put in there to make sure that we have more than 3% of foster youth go to college and graduate. And it's a really bad number. And the LCAP board, and the LCAP has said for years, look at your LCFF money and make sure you take those targeted dollars and put it into those targets. So I don't feel confident that is actually what's happening at the district. And I think as an advisory committee, the LCAP can every year voice the concerns of their families and their communities and the schools. And we need the board to stop allowing money to be taken away from our most needy people and put it where it belongs instead of somewhere else. And so when I hear discussions about, well, what about those other people who don't come to meetings, or what about people who come to one site council meeting and then never come back? It's often because they've given up on asking. Because how many times can you do that? And the more difficult it is for you as a parent, as a worker, whether you're in another language, whether you have a long commute, the harder it is to engage the district. If the response is silence, the more people will just block it out. And so to the degree you find you have a problem reaching out to stakeholders, it's actually not, it's a sign of what isn't working. And I know that all of the board has other duties besides being Sacramento City Unified School District board members. And yet the lives of those 40,000 children and their families, really, we don't have the power to change things in their lives. Only you have the power over the things that you control as a board to say, no, we're not going to do that. And this is why. And you have some very, very dedicated people on the LCAP. And whenever the LCAP members go and say, this is it for me, and then you get new guys come in and new ladies, they're actually good. They're working really hard to do this work. And if you could just say, okay, I'm going to run with that and, turn the screws a little bit here and there, I think that's where you can see that people really get excited about trying to move forward on all this. And I really thank you for having this extra meeting, because I know the last two very long meetings where it ended up very late and we just couldn't get this discussion going. We're very thrilled to have you here and the superintendent. And we're always glad to see you, because we're just a bunch of people who have kids in the district and really want to contribute what we have to the betterance of all 40,000 students. And after a while, if you find that nobody's interested, you have to kind of say, okay, I guess I'm going to do something else for a while. But I really thank you for being here tonight. And I love the passion of my fellow board members and committee members. And I really thank them all for their passion and zest and wanting to hold the district to the highest standard. Thank you.
Thank you. Student member Shake.
President Bridget, really quickly, I know we're going to PAC members first, but Sarah from the Student Advisory Council is already running 18 minutes late to debate coaching, so I was hoping we could hear from her really quickly with your...
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, Sarah.
Hi, I'm sorry. I know that this isn't exactly when you expected me to speak. I'm not going to talk too much about the specific policies. Abby will definitely take care of that for me. But I did just want to say in general that this district I've been a member of this district since kindergarten. You know, this is my 13th year inside the district. And one common thread I've always seen is teachers encouraging us to be independent thinkers and independent students. And I would say to that if you want us all to be engaged and you want us to be independent, then I would really appreciate listening to our policies and actually not just telling us that our voices and our policies are exciting and important, but actually showing us by implementing those policies and by doing everything to actually get the student voice represented on a larger level. And also, I would just say it's time to stop looking at statistics and talking about problems and start looking forward to solutions, because we could talk about problems for years, but if we don't actively look for ways to solve them, then we're not really making progress. So I hope that the policies that we have encouraged with our presentation will work toward those goals. And like Isa said, I am very late to debate coaching, but thank you all. And I hope Abby will answer all of your questions later. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, and well spoken. All right. Did we have any other of the LPAC committee members that wanted to weigh in?
President Pritchett, I see Frank DeYoung has his hand raised.
Yeah, I was trying to do the hand up thing.
Oh, sorry, Frank. Frank, just turn your camera.
Work, Frank.
I can't see you.
It doesn't work here, Frank.
Go ahead, Frank.
Okay. You know, I just want to say that obviously I've been doing this for a long time. And, you know, Miguel hit it on the head. You know, I'm at a point where we're asking for data and I'm like, I already know what the data is going to tell me. I mean, and it almost never fails, which is sad. But I think what I want to tell the board is that board members need to realize your LCAP members are part of your team. They're not just appointed and then thank you, you did your job, you appointed us. You know, I will tell you, I'm very happy to be with Board Member Rhodes because we are a team. We meet on a regular basis. We talk about these things. We talk about what the LCAP is doing and trying to do some outreach to the community. And, you know, we make some big assumptions like, oh, we can meet with parents by going to school site councils. Well, you're making an assumption that there's actually parents on the school site council. The last one I went to, they basically told me this is not the place to reach out to parents. But, you know, I am greatly concerned about the lack of assessments that are going on. I mean, it's really depressing when you look at the numbers and you go, we've only assessed 59% of the kids. I go, what are we doing? Especially K through 3. If we don't know where they are by 3rd grade, we're going to have a heck of a time trying to catch them up. And it's really sad because, as Miguel said, there's nothing new in what's happened during COVID. It was just now you can really see it. And parents are aware of it because their kids are home and they can see what's happening and not happening. And, you know, how we're going to make this up, how we're going to do summer school this year to try to fill the gap if we have no idea where these kids are is a little upsetting to me, to be honest. I'm really concerned about smaller kids. You're going to take a 1st grader and say, oh, they're a 2nd grader next year. And I'm going to tell you, are they really? Is that what they are? And how are we going to fill that gap? And are the teachers going to be willing to do what's necessary to fill that gap? Or are they just going to have the union dig in their heels? It's really frustrating to us on the committee because we fight with the idea that we keep knocking on the door and kind of saying the same things every year and kind of seeing the same results. And I keep encouraging them to just keep knocking. That's what we're supposed to do. We're not supposed to give up. But it is really frustrating. And I could go on for a long time. Some of you may hear from me at some point, but I just kind of want to share those feelings with you because I just think that, you know, I hate to say the district is broken, but it kind of is, because until we can get a bargaining agreement, until we can get in a place where we can do the things that we know we need to be doing, there are no big surprises in here. And equity, and start doing the things that will help us achieve equity, it's a whole bunch of words. And thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. DeYoung. Nice to hear from you. Mr. Vasquez, did I see your hand up earlier?
Yes, please. Good evening. Can you hear me? Good evening. I appreciate the time. It's making it more real to me as far as being able to speak with you guys in this forum. Because again, I've been to about 20 to 25 LCAP meetings, and it is exhausting. It's a lot of work. It's we're giving in our experiences, our what we're living on at your school sites and whatnot. So again, this is really making it more bright, better for me. But again, just for my background, I was in the district. I went, my education is through the district, and now my kids' education has been through the district. So again, I feel like I have a good feel of what the district is. I mean, again, I live my whole education to my kids. So, and again, when we talk about the odds that are stacked against our students, many of them talk about generational poverty. We talk about generational single parenting, talk about not being educated and all that too. I mean, the odds are stacked. How do we get out of that? Again, we can't provide a lot when you're socioeconomically disadvantaged. You can't provide a lot at the home front. We're trying to provide a roof over our head, trying to keep food on the table. So again, right, I couldn't do sports, music, arts. I want to go back to that. Again, I always go back to the guiding principle, the mission statement. Again, if that wasn't saying what it is, then I wouldn't have no reason to come tell you, because I could accept, whatever the mission statement is. So, but again, when we talk about equity, we talk about setting all the students up for college and career and being as successful as they can. I don't know how much we're going to go with those slides, but again, I got a lot. I've been on my campuses, every time, any campus I've been on, I put in the hours. I put in thousands of hours. Every school site council, every PTSA, every PTO. I'm going to all kinds of meetings. And so again, when I speak, I know I might make people upset. I might ruffle their feathers. That's not true. But again, I'm just speaking off what the district, what my experiences are. Again, and then also all these times I've been, thousands of hours, I'm not seeing people like me, poor or minorities, or they're not at the table. So again, I think my voice is going to really speak up for them, because again, I've been living this system. I live the system, and again, we're not getting people at the table to call it out for whatever reasons. This is time consuming. This does beat up a lot of my time. But again, don't know how much we're going to go on the side. But again, for me, when we talk about opportunities, sports, music, arts, programs, all these things, you really need to reorganize your elementary school. Start providing these things at the elementary site. Because again, I'm over at Hiram Johnson, and the odds are so stacked against us. Right? We're trying to repair all this stuff that the kids are already behind. How are we going to get them successful? And you're talking about college and career. We're only having 80% graduate. We're struggling to get graduation. So how can we talk about college and career when we're not even fully graduating everyone? But again, sports, music, arts, we have to get this stuff in the elementary schools, these programs in elementary schools. Again, I always, my kids sometimes, what do I like, Dad? I mean, I'm like, yeah, what do you like, right? You didn't get exposed to anything. You're only going to like, you didn't have a lot of options, and I understand that. Even at the elementary site, when you talk about pay to play, even at the elementary side, I still look for resources. I went to the library. I try to find things in the community, different programs that are going on in different arts, just to try to expose my kids to that. I was at Colonial Heights Library for a year or two, right? In there every day, just trying to have a space, right? We think we have spaces, and I didn't want to go home. We got 10, 12 people at home. That's there's a lot of stuff going on, so you can't really focus. And again, back to the resources. We can't reach our full potential if we don't have that any type of programs. Again, so a big thing for me is elementary. Get these stuff going in the elementary sites, because again, I'm at Hiram Johnson. We got a lot of problems there. There's so much to unpack. Talk about English learners. I never even see them focused. I don't see them saying, hey, this is what we're doing for English learners. Talk about students with disabilities. Another good population at Johnson. I don't see where we're saying, okay, we're doing this, we're doing that. Also, any goals we have. I mean, you can't have a goal and you don't know how effective your goals are if you don't have any data to back that up, right? So again, we need to be having measurable outcomes. We had to have data with that. We can't just be throwing our money all around. We're just throwing our money out there. We need to know that these things that we're asking for, or that we're trying, we got to know if they're successful or not. If not, we got to change what we're funding. Again, I got a lot. That's all for now, but hopefully I have some more opportunities to talk. But again, I appreciate the space. I appreciate the time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vasquez. Ms. Bird?
Hi, thank you. Thank you for the time tonight. I wasn't going to speak because I thought I'll just lay back. I'm one of the newer members of the LCAP, but one of the reasons that I wanted to be on the LCAP is because as a white woman whose kids have not had an issue in the district, and I mean, my kids are going to be fine regardless of, what we're doing. But I recognize that there's a lot of kids who aren't. And and I've noticed that even with my advocacy and my willingness to go out of my way to whether it's volunteering or make my voice heard, there are so many people who I've sometimes had hurdles to get through just to make my voice heard in this district. And I think, wow, if me who is educated, knows how to navigate the system, speaks the language, has other privilege, if I can't do it at times, then surely there are tens of thousands of parents who aren't able to do that. So I've noticed that there's sort of a lack of accessibility often to just simple things like at Cerna Center, for example, and just lack of customer service, if you will. I mean, there's and I think about that in terms of if people are trying to, if they're working, they can't take the time off to to go to meetings or to meet the district's requirements about show up between 2 and 4 on this day or whatever. How are those people able to participate? So when we're talking about equity and we're talking about bringing more people into the fold, I would really ask the district to be open-minded around what makes sense for people who, don't have the flexibility that I happen to have and that maybe don't understand the system or can't navigate it. So it's not just about translating everything into other languages, but it's about meeting people where they're at in terms of understanding, putting yourself in their shoes, like understanding who, an average parent working, a job, how can we best communicate with him? And so I think I had put into the chat earlier, ask your school site leaders, how are you communicating with those families that typically aren't engaged? Because I don't have all the answers, but I think we need to really be creative about figuring that out and not just saying, well, we've translated everything in 5 different languages, so we're good. It's not about that. I sent my kids to LDV, and I remember thinking, all schools should be schools of choice. We shouldn't just be, now there's a lottery to get into this great school or West Campus or whatever. It should be, all the schools should be brought up to that level as opposed to thinking, well, there's these outliers. So I really want to think in terms of being not just what's the minimums that we need to be providing, but what do we really want to provide to all of our kids? Because I think we need to be thinking more broadly and more creatively and frankly more into the 21st century. I think we just need to rethink completely how are we bringing families and kids into the system and what we're actually looking for, what do we want to achieve. You've set out your missions. LCAP has broadly stated what those are. We need to make sure that we are aligning those missions with how you're spending your resources, right? Your time and your money. And I frankly think at every board meeting there should be an alignment document that shows we are spending our money, we are spending our staff time on these things, and here's the outcomes that we expect to get from that and why that's in alignment, instead of just like kind of shooting out, trying different things or whatever. So that's those are my few points that I wanted to make, just kind of an overall observation that I want to think more broadly, be more nimble, be more creative, and not just do same old, and let's think better how we can bring in more families. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bird. Are there any other LCAP members on that would like to speak? Okay. We can take some board member comments. I just first want to say,
Angie wanted.
Member Wu?
Angie wants to speak.
Oh, I apologize. Hi, Angie.
Hi, thank you.
I'm having trouble seeing all you guys with the little hand.
Hi, I'm Angie Sutherland. I'm a parent in the district since the 90s. I currently have one child left, and she's 15. I wanted to just talk about the opt-in culture in our district. So I want to ask the board members to think about that, because we can give you as many recommendations as we want, but if there's an opt-in only, the chances are not much is going to happen. And that's been kind of the case for probably the last couple decades that I've been involved in advocating in the district. There's too much autonomy at the school sites. I can see why they, want to have autonomy, but it's really discriminatory when certain schools have these wonderful initiatives that the district has helped develop with stakeholder input, and then they don't happen. And it's just very disheartening, kind of like the assessments thing. Our students really need that because they're falling through the cracks. So that's my only comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Angie. Okay, I want to make sure I'm not missing anybody before we move forward. All right, Mr. Vasquez.
Again, I apologize, but again, I got so much. Again, I've been living all your sites. I don't think anyone could deny my experience. So again, over at Hiram Johnson, over 1,000 of the kids have been in the program. 300 or 400 been reclassified, but that still goes back to 1,000 have English learning parents at home. See, we don't understand it. Okay, the kid got reclassified, but their parent still has a language barrier. Their parent still is going to have problems going to the school site and not being able to communicate. So again, that's very important that we start maybe diversifying our staff and start targeting certain, again, at Johnson, the parents are saying, we're coming in and, it's not, I'm sorry, it's not welcoming. Even no matter what you do, if you don't have someone speaking your language, hey, it's gonna not be welcoming. I could imagine myself going to a foreign country and they're saying, hey, we care about you, we're here for you, and I go in the office and no one can speak English. So how am I going to really feel like, oh, you guys are here for me? And especially with Johnson, this is years of the population of English learners is high. So again, I don't know how many parents were involved previously or whatnot, but again, we're having some more come up and say, hey, these things are important to them. So, I mean, are we going to accept that and say, okay, this is our system and we need to fix that, And then again, I know I call out a lot of stuff out, but it's not about being, trying to have problems or saying people aren't doing this or that. It's a system. We're all involved in this system. And now we need to start. You got parents up here trying to say, hey, this is the problem, language barrier. So again, I keep saying it at Johnson, and I'm going to keep saying it until we see improvement. Because again, we talk about parent engagement. We're not getting that because there's language barriers. So again, that's another big one. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vasquez.
Katie Smith.
Yes.
Hi. Let me see.
I was getting
turn
there.
the video on too. Hi. I'll be short. I second really what everybody else has said. Because I'm a parent of 4 kids in the district, and there are 4 individuals with 4 different learning styles, 4 different sets of needs. And I think it just kind of exemplifies how there's not going to be a one size fits all to any solution that we find. And what I often find, like when we've gone into interventions with my kids and IEP meetings, is we're so often looking at how can we make your kid fit our model, as opposed to what can we do to meet this child's needs and really figure out who they are and what they need and how to help them thrive and reach their own potential, whatever that may be. And that always just never sits well with me when we're looking at, basically what can we do to check off a box, complete a goal that, makes it look like we're doing what we need to do as a district, but at the end, we're not truly doing anything for this child because they're in the same place they were when we started. And then on a broader scale, it's what we're seeing across the board. Like, we're so reactionary. We look at, hey, we need this A through G stuff. We've got our high schoolers here. We found this out in assessments, and then we're throwing a Band-Aid on it and responding to what we see, but we're never truly looking at the root of anything. And I agree when people say our system's broken. We need to really look at some foundational change. We need to go back to kindergarten and start there. And what can we do at this base level and build on that? And these kids should start with a strong, solid foundation from the beginning with all their needs met, this implementation, and then that can carry them through high school. And we won't have the need to be so reactionary when our kids are getting to high school. And I mean, that's tough for the kids that are already there. So I mean, I'm not saying we should just say if you weren't born before 2015, you're out of luck. We still need to be looking at what can we do to repair the damage that has been done to the kids that are already there. But at the same time, truly looking at some foundational change. So we're not just continuing on this cycle that we're failing these kids and then responding and reacting, but never truly solving the problem. And that is all.
Thank you. Ms. Sutherland, I see your hand still up. Do you have something else?
No, I'll put my hand down.
Okay, all right. I wanted to make sure I didn't miss you again. Okay, Mr. Vasquez?
Again, I'm sorry, but again, I don't know when I'll ever have the opportunity to really, I'm in all these meetings and I'm saying this stuff, so I'll say it out to the public. Another thing that really has hit me, and it's, now that I'm at the high school, and then, I see my first African-American teacher at Hiram Johnson throughout the whole district, 10 years, whatever, 12 years. I want to see people like me and my kids. We had our first Mexican teacher educating my child. I want to see people that look like us educating us, all right? Because you don't think it matters, but it does. Like I said, I don't have much great things to say about being on your sites. Again, a handful of people engage and show. A lot of the admins at the sites, those are the ones that reach out and try to communicate. And then the staff, the minority staff, they're all, hey, thanks, Rich, thanks for being here, giving me a handshake. A note acknowledging that I'm on campus, and so again, whatever the situation, people could be upset, but that is my lived experience. That's my kids' lived experience. How do you think I feel when we go to a site and I see some other parents that are involved, whatever nationality they are, right? They're communicating with those kids and that parent. And I'm sitting there, I just put in thousands of hours. I've been on site all the time. I'm leading PTSAs. I'm trying to do all the work, and you're not giving me and my children the same interactions. It's about interactions. Again, I'm thankful for a lot of the people that I have ran across. If I didn't have these little interactions, I'd probably not be here. Again, little different interactions. I see there is a lot of good people in the district, but again, a system thing. We need to understand. If you have a parent coming to your school site, say hello. What are you doing? You can't say hello? Dig down deep and just say, I'm going to say hello to every parent I see, right? That's the simplest form of parent engagement. If your schools are not doing that, okay, that's not making it welcoming. So again, a lot of the sites ain't been welcoming, even at your greatest West campus, right? I went into all my kids' volleyball games, and her teacher was taking the tickets every time. Hey, you taking my money, but you can't say hello to me? Why can't you say hello to me? You can't introduce yourself. Hey, you're my kid. You're my kid. Your kid has my class. There's no interaction? What? Okay, so again, I know whatever the system, we're all bogged down. We're all, all this stuff is tiring. But again, you're telling us to go to your site. So again, I know I've been multiple times on all my sites, and I keep going back. I know I'm going to have more interactions that are not welcoming, but I keep coming back because I understand the value and importance of education. Right? My kids want to see me there. They want to, I don't even know where my kids would be if I didn't put in all these hours, right? Where it talks about parent engagement is another key to the success of your children. So again, we need to really get there and start finding how you're going to get there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vasquez. All right. I just want to say that, I hope you guys know that you are just a dynamic group of community members and parents that have come together to do what is good. And I hope, I just have the highest respect for the work that you're all doing. I'd like to request that, maybe we as board members have more. I know Mr. Vasquez spoke about, having one-on-ones, or I'm sorry, it was Mr. DeYoung spoke about having one-on-ones with member Rhodes. I'd like to request that all board members have more one-on-ones with all of their LCAP representatives and be more involved for sure. I really take these comments seriously and to heart for sure. How long do we say that our system is broken? Right? How long do we continue saying that? I've been on this board for 8 years, and we have been saying that for 8 years. And Mr. Vasquez, your comments just really just hit home for me. And you talk about ruffling feathers. I was a parent in this district, and I volunteered. In fact, there's members on this committee that I volunteered with for years. And I was known as the crazy blonde lady that would come to board meetings and ruffle some feathers. So you know what? Keep on ruffling those feathers, Mr. Vasquez, because that's what we need. You are doing it for our children. We know that you're doing it for the right reasons. And you spoke about generational poverty. That is something that I can relate to, to this day. And I worked really hard, with my kids, which I know you are for your kids, right, to get us out of that. Our kids we're failing kids from all walks of life within our district. And, my own children, the system failed my own children, which is why I decided to become a board member. right? And so, I just want to say thank you to all of you guys. Those comments are just dead on. And, I hope that you will continue working with us to be able to get us out of this and do what's right for our children. I know I saw some hands up from board members earlier, so I think I saw Member Morawski.
Oh, I first wanted to ask whether, are we going to have board discussion in response to kind of the LCAP PAC members' comments?
Yeah, I think maybe we should move on to the SAC if everyone would. I think we should have that discussion at the very end with everyone, if that's okay.
Okay. Yeah, no, I just wanted to check on.
Okay, thank you. Abby, are you leading us today? Oh, Member Garcia?
Oh, I just wanted to recognize that Renee Webster Hawkins was back online. So I know she was cut off midway through her comments, and she purposely did not give us the full comments at the board meeting. So I just want to make sure that she has the opportunity to finish her comments.
Yes, I totally agree. Sorry about that, Renee.
Oh, I appreciate that. I just want to punctuate what all of my colleagues and upcoming advocates on the Student Advisory Council. I think, the opt-in culture that Angie mentioned is critical. We've got to take that down. We need to disrupt the structures that have served adults for 20 plus years and start asking, what structures do we need to create from scratch that are going to serve our kids? We have a few best practices, I think, on islands of excellence at a few of our campuses, but we don't have a system that serves all of our kids and our families. That's where we need to start. And I would ask all of you really to roll up your sleeves. And again, as I was reflecting, you have this incredible this intersection of multiple opportunities to align your spending decisions, the LCAP, the fiscal system, but also the expenditures of our COVID relief, the collective bargaining agreements, whether they be MOUs for a temporary concurrent learning approach or the expired CBA that needs to be negotiated. All of those documents need to be founded on a clear vision and plan that serves students. And that means taking down the sacred cows. I look just at a glance at the last LCAP and you see expensive line items. There's a lot of small line items, but there's expensive line items that I think at first blush, we would all say, yes, collaboration time for teachers, great. K-3 class time reductions, great. But where do we know that those expenditures are actually achieving the outcomes for our most at-risk kids? Miguel talked about the needle not moving. Rich has talked about his family not being served and being welcomed. So what I would ask again is that you ask and back every single expenditure that we have in this district from top to bottom and ask whether or not it needs to be, as Ms. Briggs said, adopted, amended, or abandoned. But we need to disrupt the systems and our sacred cows that are discriminatory and downdrafting the families that are counting on you. So thank you.
Mr. Webster Hawkins. Abby.
Hi everyone. I'm Abby Morioka. I'm a senior at West Campus. I've been here for the past 2 board meetings presenting our slides. But I just wanted to reiterate that what all of the parents have been saying, that student voices really matter. As you see in this meeting, there's probably 10 parents in this meeting, but there's all of 2 students, me and Isa, who are the typical type A students. I go to West Campus, he goes to the Met, and Sarah goes to Kennedy and is in the PACE program. We're the prime example of what like students who like represent the district currently look like, which excludes so many students who don't speak English or have like 504 plans, IEPs, who just don't want to participate in school, who don't feel the need that school is important, who aren't like following the stereotypical college pathway. And all of those students are so underserved in our communities right now that even in board meetings where we're supposed to be focusing on student voice and what needs like serve students the most, they're underserved continuously. The 4 points that we had brought up in the previous meetings, mental health, student voice, career preparation, I'm forgetting the last one, but the ones that we had presented previously, they're issues that come from students, and we have the opportunity to be able to discuss them, but most students don't. They just go to school, they go to class thinking that nothing can be changed, when in reality, there is so much that needs to be changed for students, coming from, like, directly from students, because most of the conversations we're having are, like, type A students. SAC is made up of 13 students, I believe, and a majority of them are type A students who were nominated or like were sent emails from their principals to sign up for SAC, and a bunch of the listening sessions are students who received it from teachers who were like, oh, you should go to this listening session, or from principals or vice principals saying that you should go to these different sessions, whereas students who don't excel in different classes or are considered like less worthy students because they have a 504 and IEP, those students aren't included in any of the conversations. And I want to reiterate exactly what Rich is saying, that all of the students who are underserved need to be included in these conversations, and that they should be our priority instead of just focusing on like what the district needs in terms of money and like resources, but instead focus on what students need and how to directly serve every single student and not just students as a whole.
Thank you, Abby. Student Member Shank, did you want to weigh in?
Sure. So I would just start off by echoing some of the compliments I've heard weighed towards the LPAC PAC. And, you know, the superintendent and I had a phone call earlier today, and we were talking about, I was just saying how happy I am that this district is sort of taking the step forward to consider the LPAC earlier than other districts, and really going back to the intention, as Ms. Briggs talked about earlier, of having those priorities outlined and applying that lens of balancing the playing field. And, you know, the superintendent said we're incredibly grateful to have this LPAC PAC that's robust, that's willing to call us out when we need to, that's willing to applaud the correct actions that are taken. And I think there are a lot of things to be pessimistic about in this district, but this is not one of them. Because they're there to call us out on all those other things. And, you know, today I'm thinking a lot, hearing these parents speak, thinking back to our first LPAC PAC meeting. I'm lucky enough to get to sit in on a lot of these meetings. And I remember our first meeting of the school year, maybe not the first meeting of this term, but we had to throw out the agenda because of the amount of frustration in the room. Abby and I were both there. We were similarly sort of frustrated with the fact that year after year after year, we see the same numbers, we see the same prompts, and then we end up giving the same recommendations and then nothing changes. And for parents like Rich, you feel the disdain of the system. It feels like you are being thrown away. And when Abby talks about how some of us were recruited to the Student Advisory Council by being singled out by principals, I know that I went through that, and I don't hold it against my principal. But it shows that all of this is not just unintentional and coincidental, although a lot of it is. Some of it is intentional discounting of so many voices, whether those are families or whether those are students. And so I think as we consider these recommendations and as we as a board bring our priorities to the forefront, I'm glad that we're taking this action so early and that we're returning to the original legislative goals of the LCFF. But I do want the fact that this is a good step. I want it to be meaningful. And I don't want it to be that we repeat the same words and that we say it's broken and do nothing to mend that. Because honestly, these words are losing their meaning really quickly, right? When we've said broken for years and years and years, when students like myself have accepted the word broken, there's a serious problem there. And with that, I'm glad to move on.
Thank you, Student Member Shake. And then you and Abby were the only students online tonight, correct?
Correct, yeah. It's a busy week.
All right. Thank you both. And I will open it up for board member comment now. Board members, questions or comments for the member Vila?
I don't have any questions. There's a lot of information obviously provided, a lot of things that have been spoken to us in many of our board meetings in the past, but I just want to say thank you for all of your dedication. I know that we are broken and we have a lot of work to do, but I'm very appreciative for all of you for being here and speaking up, because that's really the most important way that we can make change. So I appreciate you all.
Thank you, Member Vila. Member Garcia?
Yeah, I just really want to thank all the parents, not only for their engagement, but for the very, just very raw and real comments. It is hard to be a board member of a district that is broken for the vast majority of our students, because the system isn't broken for everyone. So we need to recognize that. I see the data. I was going through the slides. I have so many questions. You have so many great recommendations that are going to be a huge lift. But we have to do it. And I think, as Renee pointed out earlier, I really do see this pandemic as not only a moment to reflect on how deeply our system is broken and inequitable, but also recognizing that there's a silver lining. And we're at a moment where the district will receive funds from all levels of government, federal and state, and also the opportunity to develop a new LCAP, the opportunity to develop a new strategic plan, and really, really disrupting a system that is broken. So we have that opportunity, and I think it behooves the board to really take that opportunity and embrace it, and really do something that is necessary and different. I want for us to, comments were made earlier about making sure that our funds are being invested in ways that are making, that are resulting in positive student outcomes. We need to figure out if the investments work, not only with the existing funds, but with the new funds, especially because the vast majority of the funds that the district's going to receive is short-term in nature. So how do we strategically use those funds? They're one-time funds. I think that the latest, the American Rescue Plan is, as you know, investing $130 billion in the K-12 system across the nation. California will receive about $16 billion of those dollars for K-12 plus private schools. And there's a lot of flexibility in how we can spend those dollars, but there's also accountability. And just because the accountability may not be so clear cut at the federal level, we have to hold ourselves accountable. And I want us to do that. I want us to try different things. I heard a term recently, and maybe it was Vincent may have used this term. Someone used it. Is I want us to not be afraid of trying new things, and maybe we don't get it right. Maybe we fail, but we fail forward. We learn something from it. And we can't learn something from it if we're not collecting data. The whole LCFF, the whole LCAP, the whole dashboard is reflecting on data, whether it's at the state level. That's like at the end of the year. How did your kid do last year? We have to figure out a way to collect that data at the district level. I'm very worried about having the resources and not having the information that we need as to where these resources need to go. We have great ideas from the LCAP PAC, from the SAC, and we know that these are themes and some of them are very specific, but how do we begin to target those dollars in terms of student groups and school sites if we don't have that data available? And this is happening very fast. We're talking about the summer. We're talking about next year. We're talking about the American Rescue Plan. I believe those funds need to be spent by December of 2023. So this is happening very fast. I think your recommendations are very timely along with the SAC. There's a lot of work that needs to be done. That's why I really want to maybe nail down some sort of schedule of meetings, of working meetings with the board, with the necessary, committees. There's just so much work to do, and I look forward to the work. I look forward to the challenge, and I look forward to putting our dollars where we know they're needed the most. But we also need to make sure that we know if they're working. And that is critical. I just don't know how we can be successful moving forward if we don't know if the strategies are working. One of the things that really also comes to mind, and I'll let others speak, is I think it was in the FICMAT report that was presented in December of 2018. That was my first board meeting. Not only underscoring the fiscal crisis, which still exists, despite all these funds that the district will get, we still have to figure that part out, the ongoing structural deficit, but that the district is made up of an island of schools. We don't work together. We're not a system. We're just all these very independent and some of them very successful programs, but they work independently of the district. They work independently of the rest of the ecosystem. So that's a challenge, and we need to take it head on. We just can't improve as a system without being a system. So those are just my comments for now. I did have some specific questions on some of the recommendations that I can share with the LPAC. I put on my little Post-its. But I don't know how we want to share that moving forward. I want to keep in mind the time that we have and let others share comments and thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Garcia. And Member Rhodes, I see your hand up, but I failed to ask for public comment prior to jumping into board member comments. Do you mind if we go into public comment first? Thank you. All right. Anne, do we have public comment?
Yes, we have one oral comment and one written comment, and our oral speaker is Terrence Gladney.
Thank you. Good evening, Mr. Gladney.
There we go. Good evening. Can you all hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
I'm going to try to get all of my thoughts out in 2 minutes, so apologies if I go a few seconds over or kind of blurt through some things. I was on the original LCAP cohort appointed by Board Member Pritchett. It's a little disheartening to hear probably most, if not all, of the same sentiments that we had in that original cohort repeated and mirrored years later, with those same issues existing and very little, if any, progress made. To be a district that proclaims to be data driven, I remember very specifically in those meetings asking for data. And at that time, we did have different leadership at the top, but the questions that I hear now are the same about access to data. So to respond to Board Member Garcia, the data exists. It's about the sharing and application of the data to the problems that we have. Where do we have scattergrams that show which of our supplemental and concentration grant students attend which schools? How many of them attend neighborhood schools versus these priority programs? How is the spending allocated? Why are we supplementing and uplifting programs that have specialized programs but serve students that aren't even within the footprint of our district? You know, like years ago, as an LCAP member, I went to Accelerated Academy to ask the principal where their funding sources came from. And they said that there was a small pocket of money from the district. And I said, well, you guys serve supplemental concentration grant students. Does their money follow them? No, it stays at their home school. So it's actually an incentive to a home school to send their kid to an alternative program and retain the extra funding for programs such as HISP. Where's the data that reflects that? You know, I'm going to try to just on the core planning facilities committee, we're talking about equity, but you know, I've heard for years people such as Frank ask for crosswalking and cross-sectional access to data. We have $750 million in bond money that we're talking about spending on equity-focused programmatic building or renovation of facilities. But is that accessible to LCAP members? I don't know. You know, so many more things, and I'll send you guys an email just to respect everyone's time. But thank you for allowing me to share my thoughts.
Thank you, Mr. Gladney. All right, Anne, the public comment?
Yeah.
The written comment, sorry.
Yes, thank you. The written comment is from Amanda Connolly, and it says, our first priority should be to open the schools full-time like their private and parochial peers. When I was a parent representative on the committee for the Head Start program back in 2018-19, I was excited to be a part of the process, to do my part and participate in the program. By the end of the year, other parents and myself came to realize that we were only there so the bureaucrats could check off the box by, quote, local participation, unquote. We were there to cast the votes the administrators determined were in the program's best interest, and it was just for show. I don't know for sure that our school district has reached that level of decay, but it would not surprise me. The district's plan is actually the same as the teachers' union's plan. Hold out for government bailout funds and continue with business as usual. Don't take any pain now. Leave all the pain of unfunded pension liabilities and interest payments on borrowing to our children and grandchildren. Even if they move, it's the same story all over the country at nearly every level of government, and began before I was born or very nearly so. Parents, wake up. We left the professionals in charge while we went to work, and they failed. And that's the only public comment on this item.
Thank you, Anne. All right, we'll get back to board members' comments and questions. Member Garcia, I see your hand up. Did you still have a question, or?
I had a statement. Do I just pop in, President?
Yep. Go ahead. Right. Yep. Absolutely. You were next. Sorry.
No, you're totally fine. It's hard to see sometime on the screen. I just wanted to kind of hop on and you know, hearing what I want to say my colleagues on the LCAP, but I'm no longer part of LCAP, but I still consider you guys colleagues definitely in the work that we have to do moving forward. And I keep on saying that our system is broken. And I guess a counter narrative to that is the system's working actually perfectly fine. It's working to get what it's supposed to get, and it's getting those results. It's inequitable by design. And right now, like a lot of my colleagues on the board have said very eloquently, we have a really, really huge opportunity to kind of shift some of those inequities currently, and there's not really times in history where that happens. And this happens to be a time of great change and great access for us to make change. But it's going to take great courage and tenacity to make those changes happen. And it does fall to us as a board, along with our community, and stakeholders to really push forward what that looks like. The idea of monitoring to movement. I really like the way. I forgot who said it, but I think it was one of our LCAP folks that made that statement, and I think that's very powerful. But then also actively trying to disrupt the setup, and we were set up for this. And so I do appreciate the conversations having there, but then also realizing that if we're going to make any real change for people that grow up in situations similar to, I guess, most of us on the board grew up, but I'm talking specifically for myself. I understand that, and I felt that growing up, that the system that I'm in is not built for me, and I was able to tangibly see that with my peers around me. And once again, I'm directly from the south side of the city, and I know the disparities, and those and the shortcomings are often fed to us daily. But it's an opportunity now that we have to be able to address those inequities, address those shortcomings, and become true assets to our communities. Where municipalities from the communities that I come from often are not seen as assets, but hindrance and deterrence to steady progression. But right now we have opportunity to change that. So I appreciate the conversation, and I just wanted to add that the counter narrative to what our system structural actually is, and I will give time back to the board. Thank you guys for letting me talk.
Thank you, Member Rhodes. Do we have any other board members that would like to speak? Member Morosky?
Thank you, President Pritchett. And I really want to also echo the thanks to all of the LCAP PAC members. You guys put in so much time and so much effort and really dig into the data, and you know it as well as us, or maybe probably better. I just really appreciate the work that you put in. And I know that, sometimes it feels maybe thankless, or you're not making the difference that you want to make. And because we have so many barriers in our system that need to be overcome. But I think that's why we're here tonight. And that's why we're having this conversation and trying to dig deeper, because we don't want it to be a rubber stamp. We don't want it to be the same things that we've been doing, because if we're hearing that the things that we have done for the last 3 years of the last LCAP have not resulted in the changes that we all want to see, we would be irresponsible to keep doing the same things and keep spending our money and resources the same way. So I think that's part of the journey that I think we're on together. I've heard from you that our system is broken, that someone needs to move the needle, that we have islands of excellence, that we have opt-in culture, a culture that's only welcoming to some. I wanted to echo Renee's comment about looking at sacred cows. Like I said, if it's, if the data shows that we're not making the progress that we want to, although we have made some progress, and I think we do have to remember that it hasn't been as dramatic as we would all want to see, but we have made significant gains in some areas, and I think we need to appreciate that as well. But we really need to make sure that all of the expenditures, we do need to question the sacred cows, and I feel like there's a lot about the LCAP that we need to look at it differently, and I don't know how this folds into what the goals ultimately are, but like there's so much of the LCAP that is baseline, right? Like we really don't have much discretion over, right? The majority of the funding that we use to run our schools is providing a baseline, right? So there's like the base of all of the funding that we have, and then the supplemental or discretionary stuff that we get to actually decide on is a small piece of that. And so I think we really need to be honest with ourselves about where are the decision points? What do we actually have the ability to change? And what is just kind of, the baseline underlying foundation of our system? So I think the LCAP should try to be honest about that. We also know that a lot of our expenditures are dictated by our collective bargaining agreement, right? So that should be somewhere, identified, because that may not be a strategic, like a certain staff ratio or a certain, healthcare benefit or something. That might not be a strategic decision of, the current board or something, but it's still, over the long term, that is a decision of the district, and that's where we're putting our money. So I think we need to identify, where we have discretion over the long term to make decisions, but what is constrained by, by collective bargaining agreements or other, state laws, or and so we need to really be clear about what we have the ability to change. And if we're willing to, go forward and change some of those things that are broken, we need a theory of action about, what's broken, what can we change, and what will it do? And then when we go to change something, we need the will of, the community behind us, right? So we need that support. And so I have a couple other comments about that LCAP, just that, like, I think we're sometimes looking at the goals and fitting the expenditures into the goals that we have, instead of working from, looking at our goals and figuring out what actions are needed to accomplish those goals. So like if we have a line item that says we have so many counselors, we're like, okay, this goes in this bucket, but it's just based on like how we've allocated our resources so far. So I think we just really need to make sure that the resources are real, strategically pointing to the goals. And I also wanted to just, echo Rich's comments about creating more equitable opportunities for kids. I just think that's such a critical piece, and I'm glad it's in the recommendations. I really appreciate your recommendations. I think it's a good foundation for what we're doing. I'd like to see it maybe incorporated a little more in the ultimate set of goals. And finally, I would like to, the checklist that Ms. Briggs mentioned about, what the board's role is, what the board should be doing. I would love to have the LCAP PAC members maybe, assess the board on like how we're doing with these things and where could we improve. So I think that could be a really useful exercise. So I would just request, we can figure out a way to, get that out to our PAC members and have them give us feedback on, what can we improve about the process so we can make sure it's, more inclusive, or we can communicate better, or whatever we can do to make sure we're as fully engaged as we need to be as board members. With that, I'll hand it back. Thank you so much.
President Pritchett?
Yes, Ms. Rodriguez.
Can I make a comment on what I heard Board Member Morawski say?
Of course.
Board Member Morawski commented on the supplemental funds, and one of the things that I think we haven't stated well enough, and we talk about it often in our meetings, is these supplemental funds need to go where they're intended to go. That is one of the most important things. I have been in a school board meeting budget discussion and heard that in order to balance the budget, that they would indirectly use these supplemental funds. That the supplemental funds are few and far between, and they need to go where they're directed to and not used to offset a budget imbalance. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Rodriguez. And yes, and I agree. I love the suggestion of having the assessment from the LCAP members to the board for sure. I also just kind of wanted to weigh in at the beginning of the meeting. can't remember which of the board member, whichever committee members have mentioned this. I think it was actually the first gentleman that spoke about just not feeling heard. And I just want to say that, yes, we have other jobs. I know you guys had said that, we're not full-time board members, right? But we are accessible. And I hope, as Rich put it, like, ruffle our feathers if you're not feeling heard. I know firsthand what it feels like to be on a committee and to kind of feel like, why am I here? So if you're ever feeling like that, reach out to us to make sure that we're engaged with you. So if there's no other comments, do we have any other board member comments? Student member Shake.
Thank you. I'm going to just really quickly underscore a couple of things that I've heard and thought about over the past couple of days. Really quickly, some background. I, along with a couple of other student board members across the state, have been teaching a series of workshops on sort of the LCAP process and LCAP priorities. And over again, I think Member Garcia's point needs to be said, which is that data drives everything, right? When you look at pupil engagement, you're not just asking people if they're engaged, you're looking at attendance rate, chronic absenteeism, middle school dropout rates, high school dropout rates, high school graduation rates. And you're not just looking at those numbers as a whole. With the LCAP, you have this equity lens, so you need very complex breakdowns. And I know those numbers are sort of more available than some of the other data points that I've heard needed. But one thinks that you want to move beyond the data, but it's so hard because we don't even have the data to deal with the current state right now, whether that's assessment, information, or anything else. So I do want to reiterate that. In addition, I just, thinking back to the first meeting of the year that I was talking about earlier, when new members, I've attended LCAP committee meetings over the years, sporadically. But it's always tough to explain to people who are just getting involved the way that so much of the stuff is things you can't touch, whether that's collective bargaining or decades of MOUs or, sacred cows, as Renee puts it. And there needs to be a lot more action with what we can move on, and probably a reorientation as we move forward as a district. With how we can be dynamic and not limit ourselves to a very small set of actions that are even on the menu for a committee like the LPAC committee to recommend. Thank you.
Thank you, student member Shake. Superintendent?
Thank you, President Pritchett. I just very quickly want to make a few comments. One, I want to just acknowledge, again, our LCAP PAC. I think what you heard from each of them is a great deal of passion for both a real disruption of the brokenness of our system, the idea that our system is designed as it was intended to deliver results, and it is delivering those results. But more specifically, I want to just acknowledge that our LCAP PAC has been an entity that has unpacked issues very, very deeply. And so when you hear Mr. DeYoung, or in the case of, for example, Ms. Sutherland, or others who talked about, Mr. Cordova, who talked about this idea of a lack of assessments, an inability to monitor with frequency how our students are doing, it just reminded me of the fact that we have to really make a commitment as a community that we have to start shifting our current policy frame from accountability for results to accountability for learning and improvement that delivers results. And we also can't deny that the continuous improvement for learning and for improvement and for making improvements that delivers those results hinges on our ability to communicate results continuously. And we are unable to do that as a district at this time. And we are going to have to address that root cause. So while I'm inspired by the board's commitment, which you heard from several board members, that our expenditures have to be tied to student outcomes. Our work around the SIPSA process that is seeking to make sure that every investment is tied to student outcomes. We also are going to have to really figure out how it is that we can actualize those commitments without the ability to access information continuously. And in that regard, I just want to just remind ourselves that what we actually have talked about as a district for a number of years is that without that ability, what ends up happening is that the brokenness that the system design that our LCAP PAC is talking about and that board members talk about, really what it produces is pockets of excellence, but deserts of despair. And that is, I think, what we have to make sure is the focus of our work, that we look at those pockets of excellence and we try to unpack them in ways that we understand why it is and what are the practices that are taking place that allow them to be able to intervene appropriately at the right time with the right supports. And what I will assure you of is that those pockets of excellence are characterized by a commitment and an ability to provide information about results on a continuous and frequent manner.
Thank you, Superintendent. All right, do we have any other comments or questions for the group? Member Garcia.
Yeah, so I just want to stay on this, right? So I need to know, what are the next steps in terms of who do I share sort of my questions with, and then how do we come back to this conversation so that we, again, I just keep thinking that there's not a lot of time between now and June, so how do we keep up in a meaningful way?
Was that a question for me or for the?
I just need to know, like, what comes next.
Yeah, Superintendent, I'm assuming that the board, the executive board, will be discussing bringing this back.
Yeah, I mean, certainly we can do that, President Pritchett. One of the things that does become a bit difficult is convening, these types of special board meetings. We have several others that we are planning as well, and maybe one consideration is to determine whether we might have a number of board members who are liaisons to the LCAP PAC, who, within the current schedule that's in place to get to June, are working closely with our LCAP PAC. Obviously just respectful of Brown Act issues and such. That would be the most efficient process, probably. But again, I'm open to a discussion with you and others, President Pritchett.
Yeah, and I think that's a great suggestion of having 3 liaisons to the LCAP PAC. I can start reaching out to board members tomorrow to see who would be willing to volunteer to serve as liaisons. Member Morosky, I saw your hand up.
Yeah, thank you. Just a kind of a process question. I wanted to know, were we planning to go through some of the slides and the recent input? No?
No, those were for informational purposes. Correct, Superintendent?
Yeah, we did send slides to the board. We can go very quickly over sort of just a reminder of the proposed goals. But I think that this session became one in which I think organically it required and there was comments that I think back and forth that needed to take place. We can try to quickly go through a number of slides, Member Pritchett, but that would also depend on setting some kind of time limit by the board. We do have a number of slides, and as I'm speaking right now, I'm hoping that Mr. Harris and Mr. Fong Ramirez and maybe some LCAP members might be very quick to give us a sense of kind of high level slides that we can go over so that we set ourselves up for additional conversations and discussions.
Yeah, I'd like to hear from my colleagues, but I know I looked through the slides. I think all of us looked through the slides, and I think that this conversation was much more higher level for me and much more meaningful. Ms. Rodriguez?
Sorry.
Oh, sorry, Morosky, I'll get right back to you.
I just want to say that I was one of the 4 that helped to organize what the PAC was going to present. And I know we talked about in our presentations not going down into the weeds because originally we wanted to save time on the board meeting to let board members ask us questions, in front of the public. So that was one of our intentions when we originally set up our presentation to you the first time around.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Member Morosky?
Okay, I wonder if we can spend a few minutes going not through all the slides. I know there's a lot of background and data in there, but through maybe the former LCAP goals on slide 6 and the new goals, draft goals, and provide some feedback or talk through those goals. Just because I feel like we're all together here and now, and if we don't have an opportunity to kind of dig into, what we're thinking, I think that would, it would be a missed opportunity, I think, for us.
Maybe we can allocate a half an hour for the superintendent.
Sure. Yes, absolutely. And again, Mr. Harris and Mr. Ramirez Fong and our LCAP members can maybe very quickly just make some adjustments based on what they think is the most important slides that we should at least put in front of our board.
Yeah, and I was specifically maybe also asking, how does the transition from the existing strategic plan and LCAP goals, what did we learn and how did that inform the development of the new set of goals? Thank you.
Maybe I'll just start with a 1-minute primer, and Mr. Ramirez Fong will take you through the slides. We have been kind of thinking through some ways to go through this efficiently, and certainly at the board's pleasure. If you'd rather spend time on the summary, which we've shown in the last 2 board meetings, that certainly is your prerogative. We do have other slides which allow a little bit more of an opportunity to see more of the drill down, but certainly won't go through all of them. I think to your question, Board Member Morosky, and this is, really in respect of our LCAP PAC members, this has been their year-long journey of really seeing kind of the base set of goals, which obviously you see now in front of you in this slide. And one way I would frame the go forward has been really tying to tonight's conversation. The notion of the system obviously should deliver on all these things, right? The notion of a safe and healthy and engaged students, college and career readiness, family and community empowerment. But as the PAC has done its diligence over the last year, it really has come to a place of recognizing that there needs to be more concreteness, specificity. So there, it's not so much a transition as I would say a definition and a concreteness is really what the PAC is focused in on, with student needs first and foremost in mind. So as we go to the next slide and look at the revamped goals, really they represent what you saw previously, because to the PAC's point, to everyone's points this evening, we know we haven't achieved any of those other foundational goals at the level that we wanted to. But the thinking really is that by being more concrete about those things that we're going to do, tying back to this conversation around what can we see the system do, so we can more clearly define what college and career readiness is, more clearly define what safety means in a very concrete way. Our proposed goal structure really is meant to enable us to do that. So maybe with that, I'll pause and ask Mr. Ramirez Fong to go ahead and take you through kind of the selected slides that we've been talking through over the last couple of days, and maybe from there we can certainly open it back up for conversation if the board is amenable, or if the board would like to stay on this and have the conversation based on just the high level page as well. That's fine too. We're very flexible either way, recognizing that time is a constraint for us in this particular conversation, but we did think the detailed slides might give you a little bit more concreteness around what we're specifically trying to accomplish.
Thank you, Chief Harris. So I'll say first of all that the organization of the presentation following this slide, provides a similar sequence of slides for each of the draft goals. So it has the draft goal statement, has an overview of the key actions, some of the key metrics, then also some additional considerations that are in progress, and then some of the recent stakeholder input on these draft goals themselves. And so we can go through those very quickly. I think this presentation can be done in about 25 minutes, but I also want to be respectful of time. So if you go back one slide, I can just provide a high-level overview of the thinking to Member Morris's question. So really, with the four broad goals that you see at the top that are aligned to the current LCAP goals that have to do with academic and engagement, really the evolution there is very much in alignment with our MTSS conversation. If you look at the orange line, this is to the LCAP PAC's feedback really about that coherence and consistency across all schools and all classrooms, that tier one foundational educational experience that all students would receive. And it really speaks to that conversation you've had this evening about islands of excellence and moving beyond islands of excellence to ensure that all CUSD students have a base experience in our schools, a base high quality experience. The yellow is really about the tier 2 and 3 pieces. So what are we doing for our students individually based on the needs? And that's been spoken to this evening as well, as being able to assess student needs is a key first step, and then being able to provide interventions to support those needs. The first goal of college career readiness is very much aligned with our equity, access, and social justice guiding principle, and it retains that language of college and career readiness. Though I'd note that some of our stakeholders have asked about the use of the word college and or college or. And then in the green, you'll see that we've retained a culture and climate goal, which is similar to our current goal, though it really does drill down more on the culture, climate, and not the broad topic of engagement per se. Then if you go further down, we've built upon the engagement and empowerment goal with regards to communities, members, and stakeholders, with the addition of students in there. So when you see that draft goal statement, we've added students because the feedback that came from our SAC and from others is that students need to really be empowered as agents of their own education, and we need to be specifically engaging them. And then you can see the two darker blue focus goals. So the Department of Education is encouraging us to have focus goals where we have a time-bound and a narrower in scope activity. We certainly do already have some work happening around our MTSS cohort implementation, or DBDM for database decision making. But we also have emerged more recently with the priority of developing or revitalizing our graduate profile. And then we have some exemplar language included in this presentation that is not our proposed goal, but is actually from the CDE as what could look like a goal in that area. And then lastly, we had a goal that was under the larger heading of operational excellence that included some of our basic services, but it's less a continuation and more of a revision of the Department of Education's encouraging us to look at the maintenance of progress goal where we have our broad basic services that support our other goals, but it may not fit into the other more specific focus or broad goal areas. So that's a little bit of some background on where the goals came from. I would also just say that everything you've heard tonight from the PAC and the SAC, as well as what we've also heard from our other stakeholder groups, has contributed to this goal formation. It's no coincidence that some of the things you've seen in their recommendations will be echoed directly into these, and it's because it came from them. The process for this particular LCAP goes all the way back to the work from last year, and then through the pandemic efforts that we had to look at distance learning, the learning continuity and attendance plan. Those are not exclusive to this process. Those actually were the foundations upon which we built. So all the feedback you heard in the fall and some of the same phrasing of what stakeholders were asking for has been informing this LCAP. So I can briefly go through some of the high-level slides, and I will try to not linger on them so you can see what the architecture is, but just wanted to note that this is going to have a lot of echoes from what you just heard from our stakeholder groups. Next slide, please. So again, this is really aligned with our equity, access, and social justice guiding principle. All students will graduate college and career ready with a wide array of post-secondary options. And growth and graduation rate in college career readiness will be accelerated for students with disabilities, English learners, African American students, foster youth, homeless youth, and other student groups with gaps in outcomes until gaps are eliminated. Here we've introduced specifically named student groups, and really this focus on accelerating growth for those students where gaps are indicated. Next slide, please. So some of the existing actions that support this area would include our CTE work, our college and career counseling, our academic counseling, credit recovery options, and extra support for international baccalaureate programs. Next slide, please. A range of outcomes is used in this area. These include some of our dashboard indicators like grad rate, college and career readiness. We also track, of course, A through G completion, CTE pathway completion. A new indicator for this year is the students who complete both A through G and CTE. We're also looking at incorporating new metrics such as certificate of completion rates for our students with disabilities, the state seal of biliteracy, and the students in 12th grade who complete the FAFSA. So there are new metrics we're looking to incorporate in the LCAP. Next slide, please. In each goal, we've included a slide that just is titled Additional Considerations. And these are some of the things that are being considered, which are still being engaged with staff and others around. So, for example, looking at metrics around the applications, the institutions of higher education, college going rates is available, our IB exam pass rate, looking to expand upon the diploma rate, and working with departments like special education to understand some of the specific actions that they're going to engage in that might be relevant to this area. Next slide, please. And we've also included in each gold area some recent stakeholder input. Again, this is recent, so this is not representative of the scope of going back, 15 months. This is really from the last several weeks where we've been showcasing some of these goals with folks and giving them an opportunity to comment. And some of the early feedback that's come up has really been around reaffirming the importance of certain programs like CTE, really focusing in on the importance of trade schools and how are we messaging. Is it college and career, college or career? Also highlighting the importance of having access to the pathways, educating folks early in elementary school and what it looks like to go from K all the way through college. Stakeholders are asking where the interventions going to come in for students who are not college and career ready. What are we going to provide for our English learners and our other student groups when they're not making progress towards the goal? So there's a lot of great questions that push us on this goal area. Next slide also includes some of those additional stakeholder input pieces, and you can move to the next slide, please. So our second goal speaks again. Oh, next slide, please. Our second goal, aligns to that coherence and consistency priority, and again, this idea of a strong Tier 1 program within the MTSS frame. And again, part of this process is looking for how we can have the language in these goals better represent our vision. So these are draft goals, and I think Chief Harris noted that, is that we're here sharing product to be refined. All students are provided a high-quality education with equitable access to standards-aligned instruction, instructional fidelity of district programs and practices, and robust and rigorous learning experiences inside and outside the classroom. I think you heard here tonight that access to robust and rigorous learning experiences inside and outside the classroom, this idea that that needs to be something that is not pay to play, has been a key part of this area. Next slide, please. The list of actions on this and the next slide are long. It's because this is a Tier 1 goal. These are all the different pieces of what we provide for students. I'd ask you to move to the next slide and just focus in on the first 4 bullet points on the next slide. So these have really, I think, been at key discussion points tonight. And I just want to note that those 4 bullet points at the top of this slide represent more than half of all of our supplemental and concentration dollars. So just honoring the conversation that's been here tonight, if there's an interest in looking at how we spend our money and whether we're getting a return, that would be an important place to dig in. And that's been a focus of a lot of the conversation at the LCAP PACS meetings, and as you've heard from multiple members tonight. And those are some big actions that support large pieces of our system. And also in this set of slides, you see things like early childhood education, our librarians, supports for English learners through multilingual literacy, et cetera. Next slide, please. So this is also an area in which there's a number of outcomes that intersect with the dashboard. Our state tests in math and ELA. That's obviously been a challenge during the pandemic, and so we have here as the second bullet point, really looking to incorporate our district common assessments. That, of course, comes with all the challenges that have been noted tonight. Without fidelity to those assessments, we don't have complete data. So we do want to incorporate those metrics in the LCAP, but we do so knowing that it will be difficult. Next slide, please. And again, additional considerations would include, expanding some of these metrics and looking for alignment across our special education and general ed departments. I'm being cognizant of time and trying to honor the urgency. So what I would just say is the rest of the goals have this same sequence. So I'm going to perhaps jump us to some of the goal statements and some of the key thinking around them, and knowing that the board has these slides, and also you can also prompt any questions on specific slides. So if we could jump to the first yellow slide. So the third goal, we're using the title Integrated Supports. This really embodies a lot of the stakeholder input on wraparound services, meeting the individual needs of students. This is the counterbalance to the orange goal. So this idea of a strong Tier 1 program needs to be balanced by having Tier 2 and Tier 3 supports that provide individual students with what they need to reach their goals. So students are provided the specific academic, behavioral, social, emotional, and mental and physical health supports to meet their individual needs, especially English learners, students with disabilities, African American students, foster youth, homeless youth, and other student groups whose outcomes indicate the greatest need. This would be an area in which we would particularly look at dropout rates, attendance indicators, and identification and intervention services for our metrics. We would see services such as our foster and homeless youth supports, our health services, our Connect Center, Student Support Center, centralized enrollment. There's been a lot of stakeholder input around how do we expand these services? How do we make these most accessible to all students at the nearest appropriate level? We know that some sites have student support centers, and that's been a big piece of feedback from our PAC and SAC. Can we please move ahead to the first slide that is green? So this goal, which we're calling culture and climate, the key change here is that we're focusing in on culture and climate and not the broader banner of engagement, which we've been able to do that because we now have these 4 broad goals that align with our previous 2 areas. And so this goal states that school and classroom learning environments will become safer, more inclusive, and more culturally competent with the active dismantling of inequitable and discriminatory systems affecting BIPOC students, students with disabilities, English learners, foster youth, and homeless youth. I think one key point to make is that in recent stakeholder feedback, we've been pushed to really consider what are we dismantling? What are we going to dismantle? And what does it mean to dismantle? How will we know? What do we need to bring to bear in order to do that? And so I think by setting a goal like this, we are going to be pushed as a district to really make meaning of what that looks like for us and in an active way. Can we please move to the first light blue goal slide? Again, this 5th goal is really about building upon our existing engagement and empowerment goal. It states that parents, families, community stakeholders, and students will be engaged and empowered as partners in teaching and learning through effective communication, capacity building, and collaborative decision making. This is similar in some ways to our previous goal, though we've become more specific in the types of things that we want to do. Some of the early feedback really has spoken to this idea of, what are we really going to put behind this? How are we going to increase accessibility, translation, interpretation? And one comment that sticks out to me is the idea that we need to engage and empower parents and families and community stakeholders, students, not to be only partners in teaching and learning, but to be partners in decision making. So perhaps decision making raised to the level of teaching and learning. So there's good feedback on each of these goals. Can I please have you move to the first dark blue? So this is our first focus goal, and the CDE's provided some guidance on setting focus goals. And as a reminder, a focus goal is more concentrated in scope. It will focus usually on a fewer number of metrics. It'll be distinct from the broad goals in that it's going to be very time bound. You typically are going to state the conclusion of the goal somewhere in the statement, and it will be something that is this very kind of laser-like focus of the district in the next few years. And so here this goal is really specific to our MTSS cohort efforts. And without reading the whole thing completely, but it's really about this 3 years of training, coaching, and ongoing central support. And it would be monitored. Currently, the measure that the system is using is a self-assessment tool. The feedback we've had has been, what else can we use to measure this? What else besides a self-assessment tool? And really another key question that's arisen is, how can we be ensured that the fidelity of training is going to ripple out to all staff? Because we know that it's beginning with the leadership teams. And that's something that came up with the board, I believe, in a previous meeting. So this goal, again, is in progress. It's a piece of work that is moving. But again, the LCAP will need to define what that looks like for the next 3 years. Could we move to slide 40, please? So again, this is a placeholder, and it has some exemplar language from the California Department of Education. This has arisen very recently, and it's really focused on the revitalization, the operationalization of our existing graduate profile. The language here that CDE is using is for the development of a graduate profile, which would be from scratch. And the language they've used is really focused on, bringing together community members to help define this. I'm going to look in the middle of this statement here, a holistic definition of a successful high school graduate. And then what do you do with that? How do you then use that to influence your system? So the next series of slides is, again, CDE's exemplar language, not necessarily our recommended language for our context, but that is work that staff is currently doing to help define what that could look like for the next several years. Can you please move to slide 44? So last and certainly not least, a maintenance of progress goal is a term that CDE has used. That's not our term. That's a technical term from the LCAP. And it's really a place to be able to track performance on metrics that don't fit into the other goals, but also are foundational. We might call them some of the basic services and conditions of the district that help the other goals be successful. Things like district adopted instructional materials, safe and clean facilities, our core classroom staffing to be able to have teachers in classrooms. And so these are really foundational pieces that support those other goals. And certainly looking at this as well, stakeholders have encouraged us that even though it is a maintenance goal, we still want to continuously improve. So I would certainly reiterate that within all the goals, including this goal, there are metrics, and those metrics have to set targets, and those targets have to be reported on, and we're trying to improve. So there is a continuous improvement element, and we certainly want that term maintenance that is used by the LCAP itself not to be a distractor to the idea that improvement exists. So after the purple slides, I believe there's a few extra slides, but I believe I'm out of time. So I want to just thank you for the opportunity to present. I know we rushed the second half of the presentation. Hopefully the first two goals gave you a sense of the cadence of what is in the presentation. And I note that the appendix has the charts and graphs for the noted metrics for folks that do want to see that data.
Thank you, Mr. Ramirez-Fong. Do we have any comments or questions? Member Garcia, then Member Morosky, and then Member Wu.
Thank you, Stephen, once again, one, for all the work you do on the LCAP. I know it's definitely a lot of work for district staff, not only for all the great parents that we have in the LCAP pack. I do have a couple of questions, and I'll try to really keep these short and focused. So on the college and career readiness, I would say and, I wouldn't say or. So it's college and career readiness. So I see that on slide 10, there is a bullet on the seal of biliteracy. I'd like to know if there was any discussion about the seal of civic engagement, which was just recently approved by the State Board of Education. I think that the way it was approved gives maximum flexibility and opportunities for all students to really bring forward their participation in civic engagement. That is very again flexible, so that all student experiences are able to be considered in achieving that seal. So I'd like for that to be a point of discussion at some point, maybe with the group. So to to just kind of add to that, you know, one of the things that I'm also familiar with is the success, and I know the district has done a great job at increasing the FAFSA completion. I once again want to see FAFSA as a requirement to a graduation, as a graduation requirement, not as a way to penalize students for not completing it. But if we're really going to think about not having an opt-in culture, let's do also, you know, not have the students, you know, have to proactively opt out, right? Making it harder for them not to fill these FAFSA. Not harder in the sense where, again, it's punitive, but harder in the sense that that the students fill it out and then they know how much they're eligible for. I know this could be, in other districts, this has proven to be very successful, so I'd like for that to be considered. The A through G and CTE pathways, I really would like to hear more about that because I'm very interested in those. I'd love to see a pathway for education. How do we, going back to diversifying our workforce, how do we create a pathway, right? How do we support that with our very own students in partnership with some of our nearby universities? I also, GATE, the GATE certification. I remember talking to an educator a few years ago. One of the goals at this particular school was to have all teachers be GATE certified. So that you're not always struggling with, you know, maybe dividing classes, so that all students they're mixed in their classes, but the teachers recognized the needs of the students. So I'd like to know, how do we get there, right? And with other professional development, would this be an appropriate use of one-time dollars, right? How do we advance that? So one of the things that it would be helpful also is to understand which of these maybe recommendations require one-time dollars versus ongoing, so that we can start to tease out what can be included in the potentially in the expenditure plan that's due for AB 86. And I'll leave my comments there. I have a whole lot of other comments, but anyway, I just wanted to really get in the seal of civic engagement part. So thank you.
Thank you, Member Garcia. And just a time check, it's 7:55. We said we would go till 8 o'clock. Member Morosky.
Thank you. I'll be brief. So a couple comments. I appreciate the explicit inclusion of all of the student groups, especially African American students and students with disabilities. I was wondering, you know, when we adopt the LCAP, maybe we can take these metrics specifically and just create a data report, you know, with like the LCAP data report that has all these metrics in it, and that could be the accountability check for all of us. There's a couple of other things I would like to see. I would like to see kind of a wish list of what we would like to do that maybe we don't have the resources for. What it points to in terms of the goals, like what would strategies be that we don't have the resources for, so we know when we get additional resources, this is how we would invest them. I think that's really critical for our community to understand, you know, what the strategies and priorities are for, you know, if and when additional resources come in. I would like to see at least a couple of, you know, audacious goals. Like, what would it look like if our target graduation rate was 100%? What would it take to get there? What would it look like if, you know, we said 100% of our second graders will meet ELA standards? I mean, we really believe that all children can learn. You know, I think we ought to ask ourselves those kinds of questions, and have a couple of really, really significant, audacious, targeted goals that we can work towards to really try to move the needle. And I think I will leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Romanski. Member Wu.
Thank you. I was at a 2x for CTE last week, and we were discussing the graduate profile. Is that graduate profile for all students? All graduates? Jorge?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the reminder, Member Wu. I think what you heard in the 2x, which was related to our work with linked learning, is that as part of our CTE pathways, that is one of the sort of anchor points for how we determine whether those pathways are producing the results that we're looking for. But I think that it would be, I think, appropriate for us to think of what you're suggesting, Member Wu, which is to make sure that we don't have a graduate profile that lays out the expectations for the competencies that students should demonstrate if they're part of a pathway, that we think about the role that those competencies could play for all of our students. And so I think it would be appropriate for us to have a broader discussion about how that might be brought into some of the discussion for the design of our LCAP. Otherwise, I think we do risk the possibility of having a set of expectations for, say, our pathway programs, and not get to the place that Member Garcia, I think, was referencing, which is that these should not be treated as separate pathways, if you will, but instead, something that is fully integrated throughout the district.
All right, good, great comments from my colleagues. Do we have any other comments or questions? Okay, with that, this is an informational item. I once again want to thank all of the members from the LCAP PAC and our Student Advisory Council and our staff who put together this presentation. All of you guys taking time out to spend with us tonight. Great conversation, great robust conversation. So I'm looking forward to hearing from you all again in the future. Okay, with that, item 3.0, adjournment. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All right, I got a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Bye.
Hi. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you again for your time tonight. Good seeing you all.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.
Very much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.